What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Strange Road. I'm your host, Mikey, and of course, all the way from North Carolina, the bro host, Bub. Bub, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm trying to fit my fingers into the tiny
Into
little
the
square
box.
there. Yeah.
Awesome.
How's it going?
Going great, man. I'm the loner in the
Excellent.
studio tonight. Yeah. We got Stoner and Disbrow and Master Control, as always, making everything look and sound amazing. There it is. Check that out,
Check
guys.
that out.
We got the new camera. We got the new
awesome.
Brozone Master Control camera, brought to you by Stoner, of course, the wizard. We're adding little pieces to the studio, having a good time with it. We want those guys to be seen every now and then. They come out here and wave hi to the guests, and then that's about it. But as far as live, their voice might slip in every now and then, but there you go, baby. We got the Master Control cam up and running. What you think about that?
That is awesome.
Super stoked.
That's the cool. Yeah, I'm really excited that even through all of this pre-running and tech checking, I didn't see any of that.
No, that's a surprise for you, bud.
That's
how we roll.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
that was so awesome.
Well, we have an awesome guest tonight. Before that,
yes, we do.
We'll just let you guys know we can be found on all social media. We're on TikTok. Stoner's crushing it still on TikTok. We're on Instagram. Yeah. We're on Twitter at The Strange Road, and also our YouTube channel. You can check out clips. We're rebooting shorts, and we have live streams and new content always landing on there. So make sure and subscribe, share this video, give us a review, and that would be incredible. We love the love, and so we appreciate the heck out of all you guys. We're going to be
you're awesome,
hanging out for the premiere. So that's going to be a good time. And so, without further ado, I think we can get started on this one because I'm super excited. And we're going to bring our guest on. We have Mike Luoma, who is an author, podcaster. He writes science fiction novels. He writes comic books. This guy, there's not much Mike doesn't do. His podcast is Glow in the Dark Radio. And the way I found out about Mike, actually, is I found his book, Ancient Stone Mysteries of New England, when an Instagram follower, Psychedelic Bodega, told me about a book that had talked about stone monuments in New England. And so I looked for that book. Mike's book popped up. And I hit him up, and he was cool enough to talk to me and come on the show. So I want to bring Mike in.
That's awesome.
Mike, how the heck are you? Thank you so much for being on the Strange Road podcast, sir.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. This is fun. This is actually the first podcast I'm doing talking about the new book.
Heck yeah.
That's so cool.
Hey,
that's so
this
cool.
This is real time, guys. We are breaking the Ancient Stone Mysteries of New England book right here for all of you. So we're going to go through it. We're going to dig into this book. We want to talk about your other books and your nonfiction work and some of those as well. But first, let's talk a little bit about you, Mike. How did you get involved? Were you always a writer? How did you get into all of this? And were you always just a curious guy? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I guess, I've always been a curious guy and always been a reader. And I was a journalism major in college, but also got into radio. So for a lot of my years, I was doing radio, rock radio in Vermont up here. And then I kind of explored my other interests because not only was I playing, other people's music on the radio, I wanted to start to express my own self. And as I started to get older, I wanted to put out my science fiction that I had kind of been working on. I had always been writing and trying to put it out and shopping it around while I was doing radio. And finally, when I was about to turn 40, decided I was going to do it myself and self-published and got my first novel, Vatican Assassin.
Wow.
About a year later,
so cool.
I wanted to figure out how I could keep promoting it. And that's when I got into podcasting. This is back in like 2006, in the early days of podcasting.
Wow, man.
But I was like, how can I get people to check out my book now that it's been out for a while and nobody cares? Well, maybe if I do like a chapter a week, people will get into that and want to, pick up the book or keep listening. And it was really neat to be in on podcasting back in those days, because I'm still friends with a lot of the people that were authors back then doing the same kind of thing.
Yeah. And I used to listen to those radio shows. They were internet radio is what I referred them to. Like, podcast to me back then was like This American Life. This is before Joe Rogan experience, even Mark Maron, Adam Curry.
Oh, yeah.
Some of those early guys. But there were several, I guess, internet radio shows, like, glow in the dark radio. I mean, tell you the truth, I probably listened to your show, Mike. I listened to a lot of these type of shows all the time, and would hop on. I'm trying to think of some of those shows, but I mean, yeah, man, you were way ahead of the curve. That's incredible. I mean, you're kind of one of the pod, the great uncle pod fathers.
Yeah, podfather. That's fun. There's I was kind of like in the second wave too. There were like people I consider ahead of me, like Scott Sigler and T. Morris. T's one of the guys that wrote like The Idiot's Guide to Podcasting way back when. And then there was a guy, Evo Morris, that started a site called Podio Books. And that kind of was an aggregating site for all of these people that were doing fiction podcasts back in like 2007 or so. And I got to know people like Scott Sigler, who became a New York Times best-selling author, but was a podcaster to start. And he had kind of gone the same path. He was like, I need to promote my book. Maybe I'll try this podcasting thing.
That's so cool.
And that's really wild.
And I've always had a passion for history, but I didn't know I was going to get into this the way I have, the ancient stone mysteries of New England, if you will. I was kind of more getting into things that you guys are into, the mounds and the stuff in the Midwest, and learning a lot about that. Yeah. And I had no idea there was anything here in New England for the longest time. Even I'm 57. So when I was in like grammar school and grade school, it was the 70s and to the 80s. And even though I grew up in a place where there were Native Americans back in the 1500s, 1600s interacting with colonists, there was none of that. They didn't teach us any of that. So as I got older and began to do my own investigation into what was going on around us here in New England and what could be happening with ancient stonework, I was surprised to find that the place I had grown up was like an ancient Indian praying village back in the 1500s, 1560s. And, there was such an ancient history to the area that we were never taught as kids.
Yeah.
And
same here.
So that was amazing to learn. And then when COVID hit, I had been planning on going out to Ohio for a big trip that summer. And that, of course, couldn't happen. Everybody got locked down. And so I started looking into stuff in New England that I had kind of been peripherally bumping into.
Yeah.
I was always kind of fascinated by the stone chambers, but I'd never seen one.
Yeah.
So I started to look into those a little more deeply and began to find out that there was a chance that this was all ancient indigenous work, that it predated the colonial people, that it wasn't built as a result of sheep farming, that the chambers weren't built as root cellars.
Oh my God.
And it's just eye-opening as you go through and begin to get out there and start to see the stuff. That for me is what changed everything. Yep. Was getting out into the field and seeing the stone chambers. Like when I first got into the Upton stone chamber, that has a long, narrow corridor. And inside it's like a beehive-shaped chamber. And when you're in there, you're really isolated, except you can see the outside through a small doorway. And there are people that say you can actually do stellar alignments from the chamber, looking out through that door to the local or the nearby horizon line where there's a ridge. But just being in that chamber, I kind of put my consciousness out, and I wanted to say, what is this place? Is this anything? Who built this? What is this?
Yeah.
I didn't expect to get an answer, but I kind of did.
Oh, you did.
What?
It was an answer. It was like,
then this happened.
yeah, well, that was a result of it. I was like,
that's amazing, man.
I just got a sense that like people had been coming into this chamber, sitting down and communing with their ancestors and getting something. And I couldn't tell what that something was. It wasn't like for me to know, but it was something profound, in some way connected them with their past. And I could just see like one person after another come in and sit down like they were superimposed over each other. It was like trying to give me a sense of time. And I'm like, what is this place? And it was really just a sense of, I'm the place. And it wasn't like a personal like sense. It wasn't like I felt personally some deity or anything. It was more like just an immense sense of place. Yeah. And that's hard to describe, but it was intense.
Yeah.
And
that's
where this all started.
That's one of those kind of experiences where you just don't really have words for it. And I had the same experience the first time I went to Serpent Mound. I mean, I've gone back 20 some times, maybe more. Kind of accidentally found out about Serpent Mound from, we didn't grow up learning anything. We didn't take field trips to Mount Earthworks. We never learned about Serpent Mound at all in high school. I took an ancient civilization class my senior year, which was amazing. We learned about the Incas, the Mayas. That's what got me into ancient civilizations, was taking that my senior year in high school with Spielman and Willie. And it was just kind of like an easy class that I thought was, hey, this is going to be a simple history class. Blew my mind.
How did I miss that class?
Learned about the Incas, the Egyptian, the Aztec, the Mayas, and it was incredible. And that's kind of what got me really going. But again, we could have learned about Serpent Mound or Newark earthwork in that class. I see the earthworks here. You would think it would be
something they would teach, being close to the source.
There were 10,000 of them here.
Something they would
thousands of mounds and earthworks.
Yeah,
and
I feel like Adam Sandler and Wedding Singer, like information that would have been helpful to me yesterday. Like you could have told me about. I feel like we're so far along in life, and we could have already had these building blocks of knowledge that maybe we could have dug into even deeper. But don't get me wrong, Mike's pretty headlong into it. I mean, you love Serpent Mound. I love Serpent Mound, but Mikey is definitely more involved and has a bigger knowledge base of it. But say he had gotten that information a decade ago, 2 decades ago. I mean, we've been out, long enough now that you could have had all of that and really built upon it, rather than going, how did I not know about any of this?
But looking back, that was kind of the cool thing about it, is because I didn't know anything about it. It was a mystery. And in a lot of ways, it still is. Like, if it would have been this kind of big mainstream thing that, like, everybody just kind of knows. Well, the thing is, I knew about Serpent Mound, but I didn't. And I knew about burial mounds, but I never put the connection that it was this gigantic civilization that was building these geometrically perfect, using phi and pi and really advanced mathematics and geometry, and also aligning them to the stars and the sun and the moon. So that part
into Mike's chamber,
I had to find out about it and learn about it and go, oh my God, these aren't just burial mounds. These are astronomical wonders of the world, just as advanced, I think, as anything you'll find in Mexico. I've been to Mexico. I've been to New Mexico. I've seen. I've been to Stonehenge. Stonehenge is absolutely incredible. They're just made of earth, so they're not standing out like these big, giant megalithic pyramids. Although some of them probably were encased in limestone and probably looked more like pyramids in ancient times. They might not have been earth. That when you walk up, they probably had some kind of limestones everywhere in Ohio. Why wouldn't you encase those? I know Miamisburg Mound for sure had limestone encased with that around it. And it might be a six-sided pyramid. It might actually have 6 sides. It's just all worn away. So, the thing is just like anything that's, the antiquarians, they wrote tons about Ohio. There were the field archaeologists from the Smithsonian or somewhere else would come in and a lot of times take everything. And now, the records, it's just been poorly handled from day one in America.
At least we got the beautiful Squier and Davis illustration.
Yes. Which, boy, we were talking about our friend Jeffrey Wilson a little bit. But, Jeffrey has I don't want to give too much away, but he's got a new book coming out about, it's the, basically the reboot of Squier and Davis's lost civilizations of the Mississippi Valley. Am I getting that right? Why am I having a brain fart right now?
Something like that.
Yeah, so Squier and Davis's book. But he's found the original maps and the surveys that no one's ever seen. No one's ever seen these. And has found out some pretty interesting information that is going to blow a lot of people's minds about that book and the creation of that book. And so what we're learning, that was 1842 is when the Squier and Davis Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. There you go. I knew I was going to get it. And, there were guys that had written some books before that those guys had piggybacked off of and used as source materials and so forth. But from that window of ancient monuments to 1910, boy, things really changed a lot in the view of American antiquarian.
There's never been a great appreciation for ancient indigenous work. I mean, a lot of the things that were preserved because of by accident. Like you look at the Great Mound in Indiana, that was only preserved because they had an amusement park built over.
Right. 100%. Newark,
it's
too.
Great.
Newark's on a golf
amusement park on that. Yeah.
But,
the Octagon.
now we can go there.
Yeah.
Now we can go there and stand in the middle and realize that, this ditch and mound, they were actually constructing an artificial horizon around themselves so they could look at the stars and, chart the stars in an area where there was no, there were no ridges to use.
Exactly. Exactly.
So there's been such a lack of appreciation for indigenous work. And that's what I discovered when I started looking into the stonework in New England, is that everybody assumes it was built by people who came here from Europe and or sheep farmers. There's also people who are like, oh, this was all built in 30 years between 1810 and 1840 during the merino sheep craze, where everybody was raising sheep.
Yeah. But some of those walls, some of the ceiling, the way those ceilings are laid and come together, the way they stack those giant, I mean, what are we talking? A ton, 2 tons, 3 tons, some of these stones are huge that create the roofs, and
the dome.
From the photos I've seen, I mean, they're just perfectly laid. Like a sheep farmer's doing that kind of masonry. Come on.
I'm going to tell you that the ancient Native Americans in the Northeast work with stone.
Oh, for sure.
And they did amazing things with stone.
Right.
They perched boulders. I think they actually altered the landscape to try to make ridges look like serpents rising up out of the underworld, because they looked at the cosmos as kind of a 3-tiered system. You had the underworld where you had your water serpents and
oh my God,
water panthers and things. You have the day world or our world where we live, and then you have the sky world where the thunderbirds were.
Yep.
And a lot of the stonework appears to have been built to try to tie all 3 together.
Yeah.
So that the reason that you have a stone serpent is that it's drawing the serpent energy from the underworld into this world. And the reason that it's oriented towards a certain alignment may be to draw in the sky world and tie the 3 into balance in that way.
Father Sky and Mother Earth, or it's this dualistic type of this type of religion where it's Father Sky, Mother Earth, and it's all about harmony. We have this. There are stone structures in Ohio on top of these Fort Hill, Spruce Hill. They have walls up on top. It looks like the top of this hill is just shaved down perfectly flat, and then on the outside are these, areas that kind of look like gaps. There's gates, but what were those gaps for? They were for, like you said, they're building these
alignments.
Yeah, so that's maybe a ceremonial walkway. Maybe it was for a gap to see a certain star alignment at a certain time. Again, who really knows? There's some guys doing archaeoastronomy, but they're not taken serious by, the mainstream archaeological community. And archaeologists aren't, astronomers. So it takes a lot of different groups of people to really research and figure this stuff out. So it's really cool that someone like you with a totally different perspective is out here pointing some of these things out for us. The serpents,
right,
for example, I think is the most fascinating thing about your book, and it's all in your book. And it's what resonated with me and wanted to give you a shout to come on this show is because, I've told this story before, but we found a petroglyph serpent in the Verde Valley in Arizona that's has 7 bends, and it is aligned with solstices and equinoxes, and it's shadow play, lights of dagger that hit these bends in the serpent, just like we have in Ohio. So you have serpents. Jeffrey on our show talked about at least 10 serpents that he knows in the United States, 10 other serpent mounds that are just mounds. So it's a really, really interesting iconography that we can't get away from on this show. VJ, our buddy from India, if you ever would want to listen to our episodes with VJ, I think you would really connect with him. Maybe have a chance where you guys could talk together too, because he's been researching serpents and the connection with ancient India and ancient Ohio, and that these places were actually yogic temples, the Kundalini yoga temples, and that these places were these kind of consciousness shifting machines of sorts. And they're using astronomy and geometry and kind of ties languages together that are Native American words and the ancient language of Tamil, which is what he speaks, or Tamil, however you want to pronounce it, and there in South India. But I bet he would be blown away to see your research on these serpents. And after this, I'm definitely going to share that with them. But he'd be somebody to connect with, Mike, for sure.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't expect to see serpents, and I didn't think that these stone walls, as I don't call them anymore,
right,
were serpents. But the more I looked into them, and the more that I began to see like repeating patterns, I began to realize that these weren't just clearing piles. They weren't just, stuff that was pushed out of the way so they could farm or sheep or whatever. But there was an actual design and structure to a lot of these old stone rows that it was like a repeating pattern, and it was serpentine. And as you start to look into this, there's people out there who have been doing research a lot longer than me. Like, there's a guy by the name of Tim McSweeney who is on Facebook, who has a group called Celebrating the Ceremonial Stone Landscapes of Turtle Island. Waking Up on Turtle Island. And he's got a blog, Waking Up on Turtle Island, and he'll show like the serpents that he sees and illustrate them with actual like eyes and antlers to try to get people to see these stone rows as serpent forms, as petroforms. So there's a lot of people that have been doing work in this area before me that I've now connected with, and that's really rewarding. And so I don't want to say like it's just me seeing these things, but I've been picking it up from the people that I've been learning from.
I mean, we've had
that was going to be a question.
Yeah, when you said Turtle Island, my brain broke, because we had another gentleman on that's been researching from India, South India, turtle migrations and ancient Tamil people following turtles to America, and this idea of Turtle Island. And also our friend Ross Hamilton talks about Serpent Mountain being the head of Turtle Island and Ohio being essentially like either the heart of Turtle Island, like really North America was this Manitou civilization. And so these are pieces and puzzles, Mike, that we've been really putting together. And this Turtle Island theme, the serpent theme, we can't get away from it. And here we are again talking about Turtle Island,
Right.
I really think it goes back to the indigenous history of this
100%
continent, and I think that the complexity of their civilization was greater than we give them credit for.
100%.
And I even think there's a chance that if you go back to the Ice Age, there could have been a civilization here, indigenous civilization that inspired the tales of Atlantis.
Yep.
If you really want to reach far, you can maybe say that, because I don't think the stories of Atlantis that we have are necessarily accurate in their detail, but they may be accurate in describing a civilization that came before.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it could have been a civilization here on the other side of the Atlantic.
It could have been an outpost for the Atlantean civilization, or it's a worldwide culture. Atlantis was a city. The Atlanteans were the people, but it was kind of like the United States, how we've kind of spread out all over the world. People speak English all over the world, and we spread our culture all over the world. We talked about this at nauseum too on the show of we could have been part of Atlantis, if you will, or like I said, an outpost, like in Star Wars. You've got your Empire outpost out on the far reaches. Maybe we were part of that. And it sure seems like it, because all the geometry, all the mathematics, the Newark earthwork base is the same dimensions as the Great Pyramid base. What's that about? Why are they using the same exact dimensions?
Yeah, there are some interesting parallels in Abenaki lore. Abenaki are the indigenous people of Vermont who've been here since time immemorial, and they tell some very interesting stories about like the Patagogiac, who are the Thunder Brothers. And in some versions of the story, these 7 Thunder Brothers come up out of Lake Champlain dressed in white to teach the people. You see where I'm going?
Oh, dude. And you know what? I love Lake Champlain, that whole area. I want to go camp up there. So I've heard so many stories from that region.
100%. I want to go up to wherever this is.
I think Lake Champlain could have been where Atlantis was. That's
I would doubt
my early theories. So there's somewhere in the pictures I've brought, there is a picture of the Lake Champlain area when it was the Champlain Sea or Lake Vermont.
Okay.
Hopefully that map is in there. It's but when you see it, it like shows that this area in Vermont was actually surrounded by water.
Okay.
And they're like I said, there's not sufficient detail to say it was circular seas or anything, but it was surrounded, and there were outer islands that could have been Serpent Islands.
Sure.
And so in my wildest dreams and my fanciest flights, I do think that it's very possible that this could have been an ancient homeland that was interpreted later as Atlantis, because the Champlain Sea was actually attached to the Atlantic Ocean. So you used to be able to go up around Labrador and come down into the area that's now the Champlain Valley or Lake Champlain.
And that would make sense if that was all underwater. It'd all be connected up there. There's so many islands. When you get up into
that's cool.
Canada, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, we've spoke with.
Yeah, I need to go to that lake.
Yeah, dude, for sure. Is this the map? Am I seeing it?
No, it's an actual map, and,
okay.
And maybe it's not in there. I don't know. Oh, it should be right about here, because
I don't think it's in there.
Yeah,
that's okay.
That's all right. But yeah, back in the days when there was the Champlain Sea, this is like at the very tail end of the Ice Age. As the water melted, the ice sheets had placed sufficient weight upon the land that it actually pushed the Earth's crust down. And with all the water that was melting and the weight on the land, the Atlantic Ocean was connected to Lake Champlain as the Champlain Sea. And so it's possible. It's a far out idea, but it's possible. But I do think there was a civilization on Lake Champlain in the Ice Age. And they didn't used to think that Indians lived in Vermont at all. That was like one of those things that people said. It was like a happy hunter ground. People just passed through it. But back in the 90s, they discovered that there had been people living here, indigenous habitation, constantly, going all the way back through the Archaic period to the Paleo Indians on the shores of Lake Champlain.
Wow.
So they just completely dropped the ball on the fact that there were tons of people that inhabited that area. They're like, sorry, that's too funny. Like, no, they just passed through this beautiful landscape and rich natural resources, and they just passed on this and kept going on their way.
And see, at the time when the Europeans came through, it was Samuel Champlain came up Lake Champlain and named it for himself. Which is cool if you can do that, I suppose.
Yeah.
But at the time the Iroquois had been coming in, and the Abenaki and the Algonquians were fighting with the Iroquois, so the area was like disputed. So that's kind of like the impression that they got. Oh, this isn't a place anybody lives. They just all fight over it and pass through it.
Yeah.
But that's just what it was at that time for a moment.
Right. And there's so many lakes above Lake Champlain that all kind of connect down through, correct? From up in Canada on
not
down.
Not really. We go up, you get the Richelieu River, and that goes up to the St. Lawrence. But but the watersheds are connected.
That's so cool.
The Native Americans used to range across the entire area.
Yeah, for
using
sure.
the whole watersheds and using all the rivers.
Well, the Algonquins were in Michigan or all around the lake. Of course they traveled all the way up through upstate New York, and Lake Oneida, the Finger Lakes in upstate New York. I mean, there's so many incredible places that, there would be massive settlements. Even in the Delaware River Valley and the Hudson River Valley. I mean, there's a lot of stone chambers in that region too, if I'm not mistaken.
But you find that myth all over New England where people say, oh, the Indians didn't live here.
Yeah.
And I think it's in a way to assuage the guilt that people feel about having taken Indian land or, taken over Indian land.
Right.
Yeah.
So, if Indians didn't live in all the places they say Indians didn't live, then they didn't live anywhere.
Right.
So
they were never here.
Yeah.
Which is
and that's the erasure crazy that you hear about,
Sure.
And that's so true. Like I was mentioning before, I found out the place I grew up had been an Indian praying village. This is where like the Christianized Indians had gathered. There were like 5 different cities along the frontier at the time, which is now like the I-495 corridor in Massachusetts. And not only that, but a mile away from where I grew up, there's a place called the Flag Swamp, and that's where they discovered the oldest stone construction in New England, in Massachusetts, which was a Native American stone wall built as part of a rock shelter. And this was found at the end of the 70s, and they found it because they were doing a research assessment before building a highway. But even finding this 4,000-year-old stone wall and this ancient habitation didn't stop them from building the highway. After they dug it up, they blew it up and they built the highway right through there.
There's
this
a
is one
dagger
of those
in the
things.
heart. Oh,
yeah. It's one of those things that kills me though, because it's like 4,000 years ago, you have an example of Native Americans building with stone in Massachusetts that nobody knows about or talks about.
And even the fact
blew
that
it up.
Even if it's blown up, it was still at least written about. Somebody had some kind of a record for it. But because it's not here now, you're going off of a lot of times like what someone said 150 years ago. they're teaching the same thing that they're teaching in the 1890s of, hey, this is the fact, this is what it is. And they're still teaching it going all the way through. And when new information comes out, it's like, well, that just doesn't fit our timeline. That doesn't fit the narrative that we've already have built. So this kind of stoppage happens where new information doesn't get cycled in, new research comes in. It's like, well, it's, Serpent Mound's actually could be 5,000 years old. It could be much, much older. Maybe it's over 12,000. Maybe it's pre-Diluvian. Maybe there was a site here before the serpent was ever here that was a holy sacred site, considering it's inside of an impact crater and on top of this ridge, and it's just like a mind-blowing spot right by a river system.
So here's a thought. What if Serpent Mound was originally a stone serpent? Because they have found stones inside of the Serpent Mound. What if it began life as a stone serpent that was added to or with earth over time?
Right.
Sure.
And that's a possibility too. And maybe they were just laying stones on top to just make the shape, and eventually it kind of grew. Now they did know that there is a stone altar, and you can see it with Jeffrey Wilson's LiDAR, that there was something in the oval of the what they call the cosmic egg, the head. There was something there. They found the stones just in the woods. In the woods. Just tossed. Garbage. And the stones are right there. So there you go. They've found that big monolith at the bottom that they said, oh, that's nothing. That's just a rock that came out. It's got 4 sides, rings like a bell when you hit it with the hammer on the end of it. It's just laying down there on the bottom of you can hike right to it. I mean, it's crazy. And then you mentioned water serpent. There's a water serpent below that Tom told us about in 2019. We hiked down there the first time, and it's this rock face that kind of fell off the side of the cliff, fell down into the water, and the piece that's sticking up is this serpent head. This giant in that area is super vibey, and there's been evidence of pottery shards, and there's people doing ceremony in there in ancient times, these water ceremonies, and it's right below in the Brush Creek. So you have the serpent above, the water serpent below, and none of that's been dug. None of that's been researched down there officially. Just, no big deal. Nothing to see here.
When I went to see the Serpent Mound, I actually went down and did the trek down and around the mound, so you can see some of the stuff along the creek down there.
Yeah, awesome.
Because you don't usually hear about that.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Nope.
But yeah, it's illuminating to look into this early history, the ancient or not so ancient history.
Yeah.
That, was right in our backyards and they didn't tell us about. It's no wonder we want to learn more,
Exactly. You get a sense that it's almost being hidden. That's where I get more fury. I get more enthralled, especially in 2012, 2013, when I was really on a mission to try to figure out and understand these legends of giants, not even legends, but giant skeletons being pulled out of mounds all over the United States and especially in Ohio. And just that, like, being blown away, number one, that I didn't know anything about this in my own state. I was into weird stuff my whole life. I've been interested. How did I not know about this? And that's what really just snapped me out of a fog and became obsessed, because it really was fishy that I hadn't known about this. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It does, because I had a similar kind of thing happen with this with my search in the stone stuff in New England. One of the books that people recommend when you start getting into this is a book called Manitou by James Maver and Byron Dix. It's 1989. These are the first guys to say, hey, we think a lot of this stonework in New England is of Native American origin.
Yeah.
And here's why. And here's, there's stellar alignments. And so that was the case they were making in Manitou. I was reading the book, and I'm visiting my mom. It's like, quarantine time, so I had to go through all the hoops, but I'm finally in her backyard, and I'm sitting there reading this book, And I had never heard of Flag Swamp, this place a mile away from me. I knew, like, when I was a kid, I could ride my bike on the highway before it was built because it was cool that, it wasn't open yet. And I knew that some guys had been digging there for Indian artifacts. Yeah. That's about all I knew. But I didn't put two and two together. And then I was reading in Manitou this book, sitting there in my mom's backyard, about the Flag Swamp and this 4,000-year-old stone row. I'm like, that's a mile away from here.
Incredible.
And here I am in my 50s, and I had never heard of this.
In your 50s, yeah, too. Wow. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, I discovered this stuff. I was probably like, I don't know, 32, 31. I mean, like I said, I'd been to Serpent Mountain at that point, but never put all this stuff together and didn't have that mind-blowing, like, oh my God, especially when the park ranger began to tell me about the story of the giants and then held back, and then we chased him down the parking lot and he told us about Legends of Giants after we made him like, dude, you can't just hold that back. And it's like, why is this park ranger telling us all this about giant skeletons? I'm like, there's no way how have I not known? And it just sent me on this path. And, I'm not completely obsessed, but when I sit here and talk to someone like you, I get that burst of energy about this stuff again, because it brings me back to my own discovery and awakening. And like you said, in our own backyard, boom, you're in your 50s, I'm in my 30s. It's really no difference. We're grown men just learning about this really cool shit right in our own backyard.
That's why I did the subtitle, Discovering Ancient History All Around Us, on my book, because I was like,
I'm going to put that image here. Up. There it is. Yep.
It is here. It's everywhere.
This is the cover of Mike's book here. We have show that. Yeah, cool.
And
and there it is.
Upton Stone Chamber is the top image. There's the zinc erratic is down in the lower right, and then there's the Calendar 1 chamber on the lower left, and a feature in central Vermont. I can't say the site because it's a private site that I'm not supposed to reveal, but that thing looked like a turtle.
That's a turtle. That's 100% a turtle.
That was like, oh, okay.
Incredible.
And
now here was a chamber here.
That's the interior of the Upton chamber.
Okay.
And I think as you look down inside of that chamber, it almost looks like a profile face on the left-hand side.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Yeah.
And the way that profile is, it kind of changes as you walk past it. It's
wow.
It's a little bit strange.
Look at that.
It's not supposed to be anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are slabs, and there's some like ice and water, and
yeah.
That's really cool.
The lower part of the chamber, is usually has water in it. Every time I've been there. And I've actually heard one Native American tribal historic preservation officer describe that as a way they did observations of the stars. They would look at the stars reflected in the water that was pooled in that entryway.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, that's an interesting way to look at that.
Yeah, there's a chamber in Pennsylvania that is a summer solstice pool. It's a carved, laid freshwater spring. They built the chamber around a spring and then essentially cased it in this beautiful stone, and it's just crystal clear water. And you sit at the back of this chamber, and that summer solstice sunset comes in there and lights up that chamber with the pool and just glows that whole room. And that's just over in Pennsylvania, over in Coal Town. I mean, how many of these things are there? There's got to be maybe thousands we don't know about.
The one that we're looking at in the pictures in Neshoba, or Acton, Massachusetts, but on the Neshoba Brook Trail. And that one they say is a potato cave. Like, it was used for storing ice and for storing potatoes. But I think it's older. It's been restored, so you can't really get the vibe from it.
Yeah.
But I think that it predates colonial usage, even if it saw colonial usage.
Right.
And I think that's some of what we see with a lot of this stonework, is that it was later adapted and used by colonial folks and settlers who came in afterwards. I think they came in, they saw stonework, and they didn't think the savages built it. So, they would have thought, well, this was a quick claim, or, somebody was here and just left this and then would have used what was there. So I think that we saw a lot of people adapting these structures, whether it was stone rows or stone chambers, to be used as, part of their farms. But it isn't necessarily because they're originally there.
I mean, what we're looking at here, folks that are just listening, is you have an entranceway that above you is a giant stone slab with. Now, is there mortar when you get in there? Are these stones laid with mortar?
No,
Are they
all dry stone?
They're all dry laid, which is, that's a really hard thing to do.
That's crazy.
Not a lot of people knew how to do that. That's a really, that's like Freemasons and people that's a really, and Jim Vieira and those guys were stonemasons, and they're visiting these stone chambers. And the first thing they said is we're stonemasons. We know how hard this is to create this. What we're looking at, folks, is this huge stone on top of the roof with these dry laid stones and that are creating these walls. Now, Mike, how far back do you think that? Yeah. How far back?
This one's interesting. That goes back about 6 feet, and then it turns. So that's almost a U shape.
Okay.
It's not even just an L shape, but almost comes back around a little bit, which is why they say it was used for ice.
Wow.
I don't think so.
Right. So that's the other one. Okay. That's just crazy. This one looks like we've been talking about J.R.R. Tolkien and The Hobbit and Walking Trees and Ents lately. So if you want to explain this to what we're looking at here to our listeners and the people at home, where is this and what is this place?
This is now on private property in South Woodstock, Vermont, but it's the Calendar 2 Chamber. Again, got its name from Maver and Dix, the guys who wrote Manitou. A lot of these chambers have names that they gave them. That shows you how influential their book is.
Sure.
But this one here has a winter solstice alignment, so that when the winter solstice sunrise comes up, it actually strikes the back of the chamber. I know a researcher who thinks that it could be a Celtic monk's oratory because it has the same basic foundation outline as some over in Orkney. I'm not sure of that. I can't go there yet.
Yeah.
But I think most of these things are indigenous.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that this one is, but it does have a winter solstice orientation on it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple more pictures, maybe if we go.
Yeah, totally.
Fast. But yeah, this is the same chamber.
Wow.
If you can see,
that's beautiful.
Looking in through the door, you can even see there's
the light.
A little bit of light in the back.
Yeah.
That's because there is a little bit of a vent above it. But that's about where the shaft of light hits. And, we're looking at a square chamber or a rounded chamber front and a square door and the light at the back of this chamber. And that's where the light hits on the winter solstice when the sun comes up.
Wow. So that one's a winter solstice. The one in Pennsylvania is a summer solstice that lights up this big pool. I mean, this is just...
that's really cool.
Now, have you heard of Dennis from the... I don't know if you ever come in contact with Dennis from Stonehenge of America.
America Stonehenge?
Yeah, from
New Hampshire?
America Stonehenge.
I don't know Dennis. I know of him, but I don't know him.
Have you had a chance to go out there yet?
Not yet, no.
Yeah, well, I would love
I like
to
finding
take a trip
previously undiscovered spots.
Yeah.
I'm kind of... because so much is here that people don't know about.
Yeah.
I usually try to find places that haven't been found and
that's great.
Search out the new alignments.
Bless you for that, because we need that, Dennis is just kind of reminded me because he's got equinox markers and solstice markers on his property, and from what I understand, they've discovered serpents out there recently as well. So there's a lot of overlay with everything you're talking about. It's just really resonating with me. But we're hoping
this network is just growing and growing.
There's a couple of researchers who are active in the ceremonial stone landscape idea, the indigenous work that have looked at America's Stonehenge, and that's James and Mary Gage.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of the Gages, but they've done a lot of work both on that site and a lot of other stone sites all around New England. And I don't always agree with their work, but they are doing some significant work on stone sites and stuff like this.
Yeah.
But,
and, you know,
I've got
interpretations. People have interpretations. You can have an open discussion and, you know, as long as you're open-minded, and they could be right, they could be wrong. You could have your own ideas about it. But I like the fact that at least someone's talking about it. At least these folks, the Gages, are doing the research. You're doing the research. Dennis is helping, you know, preserving these properties. This is on private land, which is, I think, helpful. You know, maybe it's kind of sucks that the general population can't just, I guess, park at a gift store parking lot and you know, walk up and see this. But places like this need to be protected, because I don't know how long that thing would have been around if it wasn't on private property. What do you think about? I mean, has this family been in their family for years, or?
Actually, the people that own it now, I think, are fairly new, but it was in one family for quite some time, from what I've heard. So
good.
There is another chamber, the Calendar 1 chamber, which is in a lot less of an ideal condition. And the group I mentioned, the New England Antiquities Research Association, Nera, has been trying to work with the Vermont Land Trust, who just, I think, have gained ownership of that. And they are trying to preserve that chamber, which is in kind of sad shape at this point.
Well, that's good. I'm really, really happy to hear that. You know, I think,
but a lot of this stuff, I worry. I like you, you know, like you say, I have a Facebook group, Ancient Stone Mysteries of New England Facebook group, and there's about 12,000 people in there, and we're really careful about revealing locations and telling people where things are, because even though we're trying to educate people to the fact that this stuff likely exists, that, hey, that old stone row isn't likely as much of a colonial artifact as you think. It could be even older. We want to educate people to that, but at the same time, we don't want somebody going there and tearing down that wall or deciding, you know, hey, that was really cool that you showed there's all those quartz inlays in this thing that was supposed to just be a stone wall. I went and stole the quartz. Hey, thanks.
Oh my God.
Right.
And someone would do that. Someone would do that, unfortunately.
Well, wait, we've talked about this before. I think I've said it multiple times that I don't know that I would tell any scientific, research community. I'd probably do what you're saying.
Something on my property.
Find that network of people that talk about it and research it and that have the best interest at heart, and maybe have that internal network that's aware of it, right? So it's kind of interesting to find out that there are almost like these internal networks already being built. And I'm happy to hear that, because there is a preservation of it, albeit, you know, the dissemination of that information might take a little more time and finesse to get it out somehow, without having the broad, you know, educational system of it, or kind of going through that filter. But hey, I think we need an alternative at this point. Like, I think we need another way to go about it, that we might be able to do these things without having to go the traditional route.
Yep, exactly.
And get a better result, you know, and preserve better history and get a better understanding of it, hopefully.
What's been cool about what I've been doing is that having the Facebook group has had the effect of people coming to me asking me to look at their sites. And that has been very cool. I've been part of a research into a site on a mountainside up in northern Maine. It's like above where there were farms. It's where just some logging went on, but we're finding like these stone forms that are similar to what we consider to be stone prayers, indigenous stone prayers, like we find down in Acton, Massachusetts. But here they are up on a mountainside in Maine.
Wow.
Wow.
And, you know, so we were able to bring in Nera, and then, you know, there's archaeologists who are looking into this. One of them is a guy by the name of Curtis Hoffman. He has a book called Stone Prayers that looks into the indigenous work. And Curtis came up and was at this site and like helped do some of the sampling. And I got to to help like dig some control samples. Wow. I didn't do the actual sampling, but they put up light tents that keep out the light completely over these structures, and then they dig down underneath them. They don't want to disturb the structure itself, but they dig down underneath the structure and take soil and mineral samples, and then they test those using optically stimulated luminescence dating, because you can't do carbon dating on inorganic material like stone. But OSL dating, you can do some dating. And so we've actually been doing dating on these features up on this mountainside in Maine, and should get the results later this month or next month from what the property owner told me. But yeah, I was actually on a research trip with Nera and this archaeologist Curtis Hoffman, looking at these features. So it's it's wild what happens once you start to get into things and I guess do it the right way. Yeah, I guess I don't know. It's like everything I've tried to do, I've put out videos on sites, and people have embraced those and told me, hey, here's some tips and things you can do better. And it's been really kind of a wonderful experience. And that's what I wrote the book about, is like my first 2 years of getting into doing this stuff, because it's been that kind of one thing after another, leading into another. This came in after. It was just a natural flow. It's really been cool.
Oh man, it sounds like it. That's amazing. We actually have a friend, a Mi'kmaq elder that grew up in northern Maine, David Lombeer-Senepass, that has a whole presentation that he does about the Mi'kmaq and their history with the Knights Templar. And so you have Templars who were, predecessors of the Freemasons, held, ancient mysteries from the Middle East and all their adventures. And so he has the Mi'kmaq flag, which is a red cross, identical to the Knights Templar cross. If you Wikipedia the Mi'kmaq flag, it's the square red cross of the Knights Templar. And so, we're Templars here teaching people how to use stone. It sure seems to think so. That's in Nova Scotia, northern Maine.
See, I don't agree with that, but that's me.
Sure.
I have
could be older.
I think it's an older tradition.
Yeah, for sure.
I just don't think I have this like flinching reaction when people say that indigenous needed to be taught things. Yeah. I just think that they had a lot more knowledge than we give them credit for.
Oh, for sure.
And so what I think is interesting is that you can see some of the stonework in Europe change after people came over here and saw what the stonework looked like over here. Right. So I think there's been more west to east than we give credit for, as opposed or from our side of the Atlantic going back over.
Right.
But
maybe they came here and learned about stonework and those mysteries from the Native Americans here. It goes both ways.
But I do know that, there are Mi'kmaq traditions about Knights Templar visiting. So if I'm going to say that I respect indigenous opinions, I have to respect those opinions as well.
Yeah, and he doesn't talk about stone structures or anything like that. He just talks about the things they learned from them, the ideas that the Mi'kmaq helped them, actually, and exchanged a lot of information with them. I kind of just thought, because, that's just me kind of making a harebrained armchair kind of a connection of them being the predecessors of the Freemasons, and and if they were here, what were they doing? They were hiding treasure, according to the people from Oak Island and all the treasure hunters. I love Oak Island,
man. So, actually at the latest Nera conference that was held a couple of weeks ago in Matamoros, Pennsylvania, Evan Pritchard, who's a Mi'kmaq, was talking about the Knights Templar and the Mi'kmaq connections. And Doug Kroll was there from Oak Island. So I met Doug, and I got a chance to talk to Doug Kroll.
Cool.
About a couple of different things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I wonder, there was a great dyeing that occurred when Europeans first came over, or allegedly first came over.
Right.
To explore and to hunt and to trap. When they first started coming over, all of a sudden, the Native American population started dying off. And we know that the Micmac were incredibly impacted by this great dying, like lost 90 to 95% of their people.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being the case and them being that susceptible to the European diseases, I have a hard time thinking they were able to interact with Europeans on an even earlier scale and survive that. So
yeah,
that for me is a bit of a sticking point when it comes to the Knights Templar Micmac connection. But I've gotta stay open-minded if I'm going to come up with my own theories and put them out there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And
Fair enough,
healthy debate is,
absolutely.
Even David would tell you himself, question everything. David, I mean, that's the big lesson I've learned from him, and the things that, he's taught us is, don't take my word for it. You got to go and do your own work and your own research. He's telling his according to his tribe story, and he's a storyteller. He is he's a sage, essentially, which is, the people that are the keeper of the traditions, and it's a pretty important part of that.
Oh, yeah.
So, but it's just a really, really interesting that even in Maine, there's these things that are similar to where, things that you've uncovered. And it just seems like there's so much stuff that's coming out all over the United States with our ancient past. There?
Well, I think there's this concept that we grew up with that it was a pristine wilderness.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. As we look back now, we discover, if you read like 1491, Charles Mann's book is probably the best example. That talks about how populated this continent was. Yep. There were millions of people ranging over this continent for over 10,000 years.
Sure.
So a lot of those ideas about how things happened that were created in the 19th century by white European guys were based on the idea, this was a pristine wilderness. So therefore, no boulders could have been perched by savages.
Yeah.
Things of that nature. It's their biases really limited their way of thinking about what occurred here, and they made they made assumptions based on that I think are still problematic today. You hear a lot of indigenous scholars talk about having to decolonize academia, and that's because a lot of these things were assumptions that were built based on white guys' assumptions in the 19th century with their own set of biases. So
yeah, I mean, all the ancient cultures of Ohio are named after old white guys or their mansion. The Adena, that's the Adena mansion. It's just the name of someone's mansion. Hopewell was a guy. He was a farmer. So, and that's going to be changing soon. From what I understand, they're trying to go with the Middle Woodland culture is one of them. They're trying to kind of get that lexicon out there because it's not represented well. It doesn't age well.
We have to call them something, but
yeah, for sure.
It's like the Mississippians. What do we call them? Do we call them Mississippians? Cahokia wasn't
mound builders.
Cahokia. What do we call that?
Right.
Well, I think Cahokia at least was a Native American word from that region, from what I understand.
I think so, but nobody actually seems to know what it means.
Right. Yeah.
And that's usually not the case. Yeah.
And the tribes were like, we didn't build this. This was already here. This was already in ruin.
But that's one of those things that I think we have to be careful about interpreting. That kind of a statement, if you ask somebody in New York, did you build this stuff? They'd look around and go, no, I didn't build this. This was here from before. The people before me built it.
Yeah, it could have been 50 years ago. Yeah.
I just think we have to be careful with those kind of assumptions. And those have been used by those people that had those biases that I'm talking about to downplay Native American capabilities.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any doubt that Native Americans were completely capable of building this. I just think it was their ancestors of the modern day, what we call the Cherokee, the Iroquois, I guess you could call it more current Native Americans, but, the earlier cultures of those people. And it's like you said, did we build New York City? No, the people 150 years ago or 200 years ago did.
Well, you got to remember too, there's that great dying that I was mentioning that we don't really hear that much about, but about 90% of the indigenous population got wiped out on the coastline in the first 100 years. So that when the Pilgrims arrived on Plymouth Rock, they were greeted by like 1/10 of the people that used to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And Massasoit was welcoming them because he needed help against his enemies who hadn't been as badly impacted by the diseases that had ravaged them.
Right.
But the Pilgrims like go inland and they find like all this like land that's already been domesticated, and they're like, God did this for us. This is great. He killed off all the savages so we could live here.
Yeah.
Wow.
To them in their religious mind, that's what happened. Then it's manifest destiny, and you can just go ahead and continue to move out west.
But given that,
too much for me.
Given that, and we know that occurred on the same or that kind of devastation as far as death from diseases occurred throughout the Americas. Yeah, so there's actually a generational gap between the ancestral indigenous peoples and those that were contact peoples, because they were trying to keep their act together based on what they remembered, but they had lost 90% of their ancestors and the people that used to hand down the traditions. Yeah. So in a lot of cases, they lost contact with their own pasts.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. That's like equivalent to burning the Library of Alexandria. I mean, there's all that knowledge just gone.
Yep. And the Aztecs,
overnight.
The Mayans. It didn't take long for all those cultures to just completely collapse and lose their heritage, and all the quatrains and all of those tablets were just destroyed. But there's like 4 left of the Mayan, the most important books of their culture. It's like, well, what would be left for you to understand?
Imagine what we could read.
Yeah.
Imagine what we could read if that was still there.
Oh my gosh. And we have so much information off the 4 that we have. It's like crazy. You almost have the whole Mayan calendar system, and just imagine all of those tablets. And that's just one example. Go to the Inca, go to the Aztecs.
But even in our own cases in North America, we look back and we can start to piece stuff together, even based on just what's left. And we realize that there was like an entire social upheaval that occurred post the mega mound builders, the Cahokia, the Mound City, the people that built Moundville, where they were like this really hierarchical culture, and they had chiefs and they had priests, and that whole thing changed. That went away. And what we see is a return to a more egalitarian society among a lot of those early indigenous people just prior to contact.
Right.
Which some of that is probably encapsulated in the Iroquois story of like how they had to subdue a sorcerer leader in order to bring the 5 tribes together.
Yeah.
So there's evidence of this social change that had gone on. So we're dealing with cultures that had gone through major changes.
Yeah.
Just prior to our coming in and really effing with them.
Yeah.
So
right.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say what they can tell us now is continuous all the way back, but in some cases it is.
So what you're saying is it almost seems like they had been living here for 10,000 years. They finally got everything smoothed out, and then we showed up.
That's one way to look at it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything was figured out. Everything was settled. We got the wizard for we got him under control, and everybody's happy now. And then, hey, what the hell is that landing on the shore over there? God, really?
But Cahokia had collapsed.
We just got it. Yeah, we just got it put together.
Cahokia had collapsed before the Europeans came, though.
Yeah, it collapsed in about 1100.
Yeah, so that was just a natural fall of a civilization. Whether it was famine, they're not really sure. But if it was disease but if that civilization falls, it's like right now we have a really advanced civilization. The mound builders, the Cahokians, and the people here in Ohio, they built up this culture. And then if that culture kind of falls apart, where would we be in 100 years later? If we lose our power, we lose our technology, and we have to start. We would be living as hunter gatherers. The people that would be left would be living a much more simple life. So that fall of civilization happens, and maybe the cultures become more simplified, but they still
There's also people though that say that it might not have been a civilization collapsing, but rather evolving. And so I don't think we can.
It could have been.
I don't know. There are a lot of different theories out there right now.
Yeah.
Which is, what makes this fun.
Yeah, it really does.
Right.
Yeah.
Trying to figure it all out.
I'm open to hearing all sides. That's one reason why we do this show, because I've already learned like 20 new things from Mike right here tonight.
Right.
This is. Again, I don't know a lot about stone chambers and pyramid stone chambers and these stone structures, we're just far enough away where it's not really a day trip for us to go to Vermont, to go to, Pennsylvania has some stone chambers. We could head to those, but, I really, really want to get on the ground and check some of these out, because they are just absolutely fascinating. And you can draw all these lines to Ohio. Which we've been able to draw lines from just about anywhere we go comes back to Ohio somehow. So tonight's been no different.
I think some of this may be a tradition that came down from up here and north of here, down through like the Hudson Valley down into Ohio.
Yeah.
One of the researchers that I now get to talk to, whose reports I used to read, is a guy by the name of Norm Muller. And he's dated these stone structures and things that look like cairns and some of these serpentine stone rows. He's found them in Pennsylvania and in Vermont and in New Hampshire, and he thinks, and I'm kind of agreeing with him, that Adena and Hopewell may have come down through here, and these old stone structures may be evidence of that earlier culture kind of migrating down and changing over time.
Yeah. Well,
it could be all connected.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And one thing we found recently was ammonite that was discovered in a Hopewell mound here in Ohio that came from North Dakota. So
I was reading about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have what seems like a pilgrimage situation. Is it trade? Are people coming to Ohio from all of these places? You have volcanic glass, obsidian from North Carolina. You have certain materials that are found in Mexico, Georgia, which is the Etowah mounds that people are burying in these mounds in Ohio. These materials are coming from all over. At their time, was it a pilgrimage site? Were people coming from all over? Was New England that for those people? Maybe they were going on pilgrimages to the East Coast and bringing back all of this knowledge and information. It's all definitely, it has to be, to me in some way, if nothing else, the astronomical stuff in the serpents. They're sharing information in ancient times. It's total mystery who's influencing who.
There are woodland sites or grave sites up here in Vermont that have Adena grave goods in them. So they were trading.
Yeah.
Until like the late woodland, middle to late woodland period, things break down about then, and you see a ceasing of trade. But up until that point, as you say, there was a lot of interplay. You get some of the older archaeologists don't think there was that much movement, but rather the objects moved.
Yeah.
But some of again, younger archaeologists have more open minds on this stuff, and they think that people moved, far afield. Like they'll say some of those, again, calling a Medina or a Hopewell now may seem wrong. I don't know, but they think they could have ranged pretty far afield.
Yeah.
And I do think there was a lot more flow of people. I think they found it a lot easier to move than we did. And when you look back at like the Paleo Indians, those people were moving on like a continental scale. They didn't stay put in one place.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. And it's rivers, river valleys.
Yes.
They're all, Ohio's a river valley. All the rivers and lakes that are in upstate New York through all over New England, they're highways,
They're highways, and watersheds seem to be territories. Like the watershed of a river will be like one tribe's territory.
Mm-hmm.
And another watershed will belong to another one. And where those two meet is kind of like where their cultures meet.
Yeah, the confluence of the Scioto and the Ohio River is a big one. And then you have the Big Miami River, which spills into the Ohio River, which was in Cincinnati. All of those in Cincinnati was a giant, massive earthwork and mound structure. Unbelievably advanced, all gone. There might be one left somewhere in downtown Cincy, but the confluence of the Ohio and the Big Miami and the Scioto, all the way up and down the Scioto, Chillicothe, Circleville, all the way to Columbus, Mound Street, boom, giant 60-footer. We had an enormous 60 to 7-foot conical mound in downtown Columbus. They built the retaining walls because the river confluence kept flooding. They tore down that mound, named a street after it. That's all we got left. Mound Street.
Yeah. Well, that's what they do. They tear things down and they name them after what they destroy.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. I'd like to
So they did tell us in history a little bit. They said it right there on that road sign, at least a little bit, like, hey, there's a clue.
Yep. And I've always seen mound streets everywhere. Never thought about it. Now, every time there's a mound street, there is always a mound nearby, at least in Ohio. It's really...
Now, I've seen things, having seen the mounds in Ohio, because I've gone out and, taken a look at the beautiful earthworks out there. I've seen mounds here in New England, or things that I do believe are actual mounds. And there was a researcher who did a presentation at the Fall Nera conference on the mounds that she's discovered all throughout New England. And you can actually watch that presentation. Her video is on YouTube as part of the Nera presentations. But there's another
name?
Possible connective. Sarah Kohler.
Okay, we need to remember that. That's interesting.
So yeah, she's done a lot of work on mounds using LiDAR and
wonderful
and plotting them along the courses of rivers.
Wow. Fantastic. Yeah. Wow. Great. Fantastic. So, can't wait to look into her.
We're looking at a lot of this as indigenous work in New England that it's still on the landscape, but it's so unappreciated and unknown that people just don't know it's there or assume it's other things, Right. So much is assumed to be like farmers' work. If you see something...
Yeah. But these things that we're looking at here that we had up earlier, it's just like, it blows my mind. It really, really does. And if we look at this
is an illustration that we're looking at. This is what I think is what's left of a serpent effigy that is all made of stone. And the head is a giant boulder that juts up. And the wall actually slithers up to it. There's like a bend in the wall where it comes up and over the back of the boulder to make the boulder appear to be a head. And then the wall continues downhill. And if you go downhill, it looks like a serpent coming from that angle too. So from both uphill and downhill, it looks like a serpent.
I see what you're saying. What you're saying.
It sits right next to a spring, and there's like a frog effigy next to the spring. That's the first thing I saw, was this thing that looked like a frog. I was like, is that a frog? And then I saw that there was this serpent next to it, and I was like, oh, wow. And so I told the Vermont state archaeologist about it. I'm still waiting to hear back from him a couple years later, but
years later? Jeez.
Yeah, no, he had no interest. They don't think that any of this is
real. No interest? Hold on. You're not going to at least go scope it out?
I offered to show him it. I was like,
how much of your time would be taken to just travel down to go? If I was that person, I'd be like, whoa, okay. Obviously, I'd be skeptical. You know, I'm an academic. I want to take this seriously. Let's take this from a scientific approach. But why would you not have the excitement built up in your bones to want to just, hey, let's go check it out. There could be something here. There might not be. But let's at least prove that it's not a serpent or a frog. But, you know, the springs are everywhere. The springs are always right next to something. You know, some kind of a magical temple, or Serpent Mountain has a spring right underneath it as well.
When I posted about this, somebody actually shared an indigenous story about a frog next to a spring with the serpent next to it.
What?
It's like, oh, man, there it is. It's right on the landscape.
Man, you weren't joking.
It, you know?
You weren't kidding. These dots are really starting to, things are kind of clicking in place for a lot of this stuff, I feel. That is really cool. Let's see what the next one is. There it is.
Oh, that's Eagle Chamber. So that's another stone chamber. This one is built on bedrock. So it's like partially natural and partially built. And it's got like graffiti etched into it from like the 17th century, or 18th century. So like 1700s. So they say that was used to store apples.
Come on.
And it's like, no. That's not an apple storage.
Tell you what, they had some really specific stone structures for potatoes and apples back in the day. Jeez.
And what we're looking at again, guys, is another kind of hobbit hole looking.
Right.
It's got a very nicely shaped rectangular door. These big stones that are creating this roof, and then dry laid stones around this doorway, and that kind of creates and is built off, Mike said, the bedrock. But it's just an absolute beautiful work. I mean, this is very, very intricate. If you look, you can see how these stones kind of come together piece by piece to create that roof. It's almost like an arch, right, Mike? Would you say it's
like an arch with a lintel on top?
Yeah, that's so incredible. And just the detail. Wow.
And it even seems like, I have to say, having gone to see a whole bunch of chambers now, there's definitely some that were built for like mundane usage.
Yeah.
They don't look like that.
No.
You know,
right.
You can tell, like, one thing I've noticed as far as like what I look for in indigenous work versus European work is usually 2/1, 3/2, like really like brickwork courses. You know, if you see bricks, the way those are laid, very even, very structured. Whereas Native American work seems to be more flowing and organic.
Yeah.
And that's what you see is even the representation of the serpents inside of the stonework.
Yeah.
And some of these serpent rows, they'll undulate across the landscape. And so I think when you see a chamber that's really built with kind of that square structure, not this chamber that we're looking at that has more of a round sort of shape to it, but there are some that are squared off and you can tell, oh, this is probably a later work. This is probably European. So
it's not as advanced.
But you can't, what I'm saying is you can't lump them all together.
Yeah.
You can't just say they're all root cellars. You can't just say they're all this, that, or the other thing.
You know what? Some of them might be European. Some of them, this clearly, I think, you know, I've always said the older, you know, you can go to whether it's Egypt, whether it's South America, it seems like the older stonework is the most impressive. You know, with these giant, huge monoliths, you can barely, they're fit together like jigsaws. And then you see the more rudimentary kind of mortar and stone that's built on top of that from later cultures that were, you know, building their civilization on top of a much older civilization. Wow, that's incredible. That's a
we see that sometimes with the chambers.
Yeah.
Like sometimes an old stone chamber that's clearly of indigenous origin is like patched up by later Europeans with mortars added. But I actually spent a couple years working as a mason tender. So I got to see how you lay blocks and brickwork, and that's like one of the many things that kind of comes into play as I'm looking at the stonework, and you can tell if they use the mortar to build the wall or if they use the mortar to just point it afterwards, you know. And you can see with some of these things, even though there's mortar, it was added after the fact because they were trying to seal up something.
Right. Maybe there was water coming through or something, or.
So even that isn't necessarily like a telltale that it's European, but it can be.
Okay.
When you see mortar.
So it's really tough to say. I mean, it takes a very trained eye, and you have to really investigate these sites to get that level of determination on, was it indigenous? Was it European? Was it indigenous repurposed by European? Or was it indigenous repurposed by indigenous? So there's all these different layers of how do you figure out what the site is. And it seems like maybe most of the time it's haphazardly by, we'll say, history at large or science at large, archaeology, to where it's just kind of like, oh, we don't have time to look at all of these. And so maybe it's falling more on the independent researchers now and people like yourself that are going, hey, I've got a background in this. I can understand some of this and look at it and pull these pieces together. So it's really wild to think how many spots there probably are that need to be re-looked at.
Oh man. Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, just that was European, go on, mark it, just put it in the ledger because there's thousands of these sites. We don't have time.
I mean, like this site here, this image here, I mean, I bet nobody took a second look at this and thought anything interesting was about it. Or is this something that's considered an ancient site?
This is something that I found that very few other people have seen thus far, and I've shown it to people, but I think this is a fin that was carved into the side of the ridge at Raven Ridge in Vermont. This is a ridge that would have jutted up like out of the Champlain Sea years ago because of the fact that when the ice sheets were pressing down on the crust, after the ice melted after the Ice Age, the land rebounded. They call it isostatic rebound. And when that happened, stuff that was at like sea level rose. So like stuff that was on the edge of the Champlain Sea is now like 400 to 600 feet above sea level. Stuff that was on the edge of Lake Vermont, which predated the Champlain Sea, is now at like 600 and 700 feet above sea level. So this ridge is like at about 600 feet, 500 feet, between 500 and 600 feet. So it would have like been an outcrop, an island in Lake Vermont, and probably like a peninsula or just jutting out into the Champlain Sea.
So is that something? Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. What?
I was going to ask, having said that, is that how you set your scale for where you started searching at an altitude to get to that baseline of where the water line would have been? Or was this kind of how you came upon this site more just
describe what we're kind of looking at here.
Okay, this is a thing that seems to be carved into the side of a ridge, so that it's raised off, and it was probably something that occurred naturally originally and then was shaped into this shape. If you look underneath it, there are places where they left stone, like, and it looks like the stone was chipped away around it. And so I started to look at this ridge more closely and noticed that there were stones added to the top of it to kind of look like fins. And at the very front of this ridge, or what I'm calling the front, on the south end, there's a feature called an Anticline, which is a fold of rock, which I think they might have thought was the serpent's mouth. So you have that on the south end, and this would have been up along its back, up along the ridge.
So you're saying that this is its spine. They carved almost like a ridge that's the back of the serpent?
Well, the serpent is... the ridge itself is the spine of the serpent.
Gotcha. Okay.
And these are like fins that are embellishing the spine of the serpent.
Gotcha.
And up on top, there are added stones that I think are like almost like dorsal fins, because the great feathered horned serpents had a lot of different features.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't really sure of what I was looking at until I listened to an Abenaki chief telling the story of how Odziotso built Champ, which is the serpent that's in Lake Champlain.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a story about how this ancient transformer of the Abenakis built the serpent that's now in Lake Champlain, and he did it by bringing together a whole bunch of features from different creatures to build this compound serpent creature.
Wow.
And that's when I was like, those are all the things I was seeing up on the ridge. And that's when I started to do the research and figured out, oh, this would have been like a seafront feature on Lake Champlain.
Wow. Champ. Oh my gosh, dude. I mean, we didn't bring it up earlier when I think I might have just under my breath said, oh, Champ, we're really into cryptids and, Bigfoot and Sasquatch, Dogman. And, so I've always been fascinated with the story of Champ and the sightings of that. But having all these serpents, connecting it with Champ, I mean, that really makes sense to me. That just blew my mind, dude.
Yeah, I think that's why it's a lake of snakes. I think that they were building serpent forms all along it. I think that, when we look at Lake Vermont, I'm finding stuff at that higher level and along the, one of that map I had hoped to show was showing the shorelines and where they are now superimposed on maps of Vermont. When I started to find this one feature that I called a fin in an alcove. I think there's an illustration of it there. I started to find like a fin-shaped stone inside of like a hollowed out alcove. This is a different feature, but that was something that seemed to only appear, this fin-shaped stone in an alcove, at the highest altitudes, at the oldest areas. So I thought this might be like some kind of landing sort of like site for this ancient seagoing culture on Lake Champlain.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So I think it was an indigenous seagoing culture that existed. And I think that they may be one of these ancestor cultures that we just don't really know about. I think that they probably combined with the Algonquin after the Champlain Sea was just devastated and disappeared. Like, as the Ice Age ended, it just got cut off from the Atlantic. It sunk, and it turned from a saltwater sea to a freshwater lake.
Right.
So there was a wholesale change all along the shores of this lake, and they would have had to have gone inland, adapted. We find later stonework up on the shores of Labrador that dates back to the early Archaic period. They call it the Maritime Archaic up there. That could be a remnant of this culture.
Yeah.
And we could see they're combining with the Algonquin when they came inland. And that's where we get the mounds and the stones from, because they were preserving their culture, which was more of a maritime culture, which would have used the stars to navigate.
Yeah. And the Algonquins are very famous for the salt mines in Michigan and up in that area, the copper mines. That you said the salt basically just got pushed down under the ground, and then now it's just essentially fresh water and land. But like geologically, how does that land just that sea? How long ago did that disappear?
The
Vermont
Champlain Sea.
Yeah, Champlain Sea
ended about 8,000 BC, so about 10,000 years ago. But they've found Paleo-Indian camps alongside.
Interesting timeline.
The shoreline.
Yeah. And did something cataclysmic, what could have possibly ended that and destroyed that sea, or it just completely disappeared? I wonder if it was over an extended period of time.
It happened relatively quickly in geological time, from what I've seen looking at papers on the changeover from the sea to the lake. It was over the course of like 100 years, which is in geological time really fast.
That's super fast. Yeah. I mean, that sounds like something major happened.
Well, no, it wasn't. It wasn't really that major. It was just that the the land rose up and the sea was cut off, so that the water just kept pouring in, but it was fresh water, and so the alkalinity and the salt content dropped, and things became entirely different all around the lake as far as
that's amazing.
The ecosystem changed entirely.
That's incredible. So what's this image here we're looking at, Mike? Is this chambers?
This is
inside.
This is a theoretical. This is a stone thing that would be on the side of a ridge.
Okay.
In what I think they did, trying to turn ridges into serpents.
Okay.
These giant serpent forms that would have been on the water back in those days of the Champlain Sea. So I think they did this in more than one case, because I began to find. At first, I thought it was just at that Raven Ridge, that first place where we saw the fin that you showed earlier.
Right.
But then I began to find things like this. This is on the side of a place in Nicket Bay, on Lake Champlain, further north of Burlington even, and I thought it looked constructed. To me, I'm seeing pieces put together. So this is me trying to draw what I saw laid out on the side of the ridge as a stone construct from overhead.
Totally.
But because I couldn't get overhead, I didn't have drones or anything, so I was trying to draw this structure that seemed to be laid out on the side of this ridge.
That's very interesting. I mean, I can totally see it. That's so cool. And this is a pretty famous chamber. I know I've seen
that's
photos
the
of this.
Upton Stone Chamber. Yeah, that's in Upton, Massachusetts. That's the first one I went into where I had my experience, and that's when I decided these are likely indigenous works, and then I discovered all these people had been thinking this anyway. So it was kind of like that was my intuition, and then following up on that, I began to discover it wasn't just my intuition. It was, something that was going on that people were talking about. That's when I was told, you have to pick up this book, Manitou. You need to read this.
Wow. Yeah, I know that's influenced so many people that we've talked to. That book pops up all the time, and it's one that I really, really need to get, and I need to read and talk to those folks for sure.
Well, they're not with us, unfortunately.
They're not.
Maver and Dix have both passed away.
Oh, wow.
What is nice, though, is that Byron Dix's widow, Diane Dix, has come into my Facebook group and thanked me for carrying on his work.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Awesome, Mike. That's amazing.
Me and others. I mean, not just me, but me and others.
Yeah.
She was like, I want to thank you and others for carrying on what they did.
It takes a team.
Right.
And this image here, it looks kind of like I guess a dolmen maybe that's been tipped over. I'm trying to maybe describe what we're looking at.
It looks kind of like an arrow on its side to me. And this is at the base of Raven Ridge, pointing up towards the features.
That's really interesting. It looks carved.
It does. That back of it
shaped.
really does.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like a finger going like it's up this way.
And what we're looking at for folks just listening is this giant stone that seems to be tipped over and is curved into a point from the top and the bottom that creates this point. And it does look a lot like an arrowhead. That's maybe it's a direction, maybe it's pointing somewhere or guiding people to somewhere. It's a marker of some sort. But it does seem directional to me. It looks worked. It looks like somebody has chipped away to create that shape. Really, really fascinating.
And this is what I was finding at Raven Ridge is it looked like the stone was worked, and not by metal tools probably.
Yeah.
But it didn't look like it was natural. And I've since been told, this can occur naturally.
Yeah.
But a lot of stuff can occur naturally. It doesn't mean it necessarily did.
Yeah.
Fair point.
Exactly.
And when we think about the fact there were millions of people here for 10,000 years that we didn't used to think about their actions, it's entirely possible they did something like this along the way.
I 100% agree. That's
This is actually up in Maine. This is on that mountain in Maine I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
This points towards the main site. No pun intended. This isn't actually part of the main grouping of all the stone structures we found, but it's on the other side of the summit pointing towards it. And this stone actually points towards it. What we're looking at is kind of an arrow-shaped stone, and it's got a little stone sitting on top of it. The little stone sitting on top of it, we can't really see that well, but it is an incredible sample.
Yeah, it
has all kinds of colors. It's almost iridescent, and there's a little like gash cut out in it. And if you look at that, the stone sitting on top, the gash, if you follow the gash, you'd get to a spring. But if you follow the arrow underneath it, you get to the other site, which has all the stonework.
Wow!
And how big are these stones?
That is about 3 feet across, that one.
Okay. Just perspective wise, I was wondering if I was looking at this from, say, above, from a ridge down or something. And
maybe
it's
not
the
that big.
It'd be like when you're walking on
this
a
is
path.
me standing up. Yeah,
Gotcha.
This is me standing up above it. So
gotcha. Okay.
It's not that large a feature, but according to the property owner, this part of the mountain really wasn't used even by the logging company because it's wet and inaccessible. So it's like this has just been sitting there for we don't know how long.
Wow.
It's
interesting, man. It is very, very. Does that archaeologist think that there's something to this stone here?
Curtis does. Curtis Hoffman, the guy who wrote Stone Prayers, he's one of the few who's out there who's open-minded to this. He certainly thinks this is something.
It looks like something.
That's cool.
I don't know what else to say.
Well, I mean, draw the conclusion from the it's pointing this direction. Did you find something at the other end of that? That are we drawing those lines together? I mean, that's as conclusive as it can get in my mind. If it's not, if it's pointing one direction and you end up, and you go, hey, it pointed this way, zigzagging in your mind. Well, no, but clearly if it's directionally in the same point of sight, I mean, it seems like they are, markers. I mean, it's not like we don't use them, right? In modern
hiking
times
trails.
As well, still we have.
There's stacks of stones along anywhere, any trail out west. You're going to see a stack of stones that kind of looks like that.
I had to learn what those were so I could tell them apart from what I'm looking at,
Right. And that's why John Hickenbottom, a lot of those guys in the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, they don't want you building those on your hiking trails.
Don't do it.
It's a no. We've seen them. People make those out west. That's when I first saw it, was hiking out west. But it's you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, don't
Folks
do that.
at home. It's not a good idea.
Please don't build cairns and stacks of stones in public. And even like in lakes and rivers, if you do that, you can be disturbing the lake's ecosystem or the river's ecosystem and be killing off some, hundreds of organisms. So you don't really want to do that.
Yeah, it's not a good idea.
Public service announcement.
Yes. Exactly. Now, is this a different angle of a chamber that we looked at earlier? Or is this?
Yeah, this is the outside of the Potato Cave in Acton, Massachusetts.
Gotcha.
Or the supposed Potato Cave.
Yeah.
There are actual documented stone prayers all around this. That's
cool.
This trail through time that they have in Acton, Massachusetts is one of the few places that publicly acknowledges that these are stone prayers that go back to indigenous traditions, and they have kiosks describing it. They have the declaration on ceremonial stone landscapes from the United South and Eastern tribes, because the indigenous people have since come out and say, yes, our ancestors built with stone in the Northeast.
Yeah, sure.
There's resolutions that are out there. These are real things, and they're on kiosks near this stone chamber, luckily.
Wow. Yeah, and that's the thing, is we just don't hear a lot of the elders. They don't want to share these stories with the public. A lot of people like the Hopi, and they want to hold on to their stories, their tradition to themselves, and rightly so. Their culture's been destroyed.
That's how this came out, is because people like us started finding these things. There's an investigator down in Massachusetts, Peter Waxman, who has a site called Rock Piles, a blog called Rock Piles, one of the first ones that I was learning stuff from. He like got in touch with tribal representatives, the deputy historic tribal representative for the Narragansett, and he went to his elders, the tribal representative, the historic tribal, the deputy historic tribal preservation officer. Let me get his name right.
Okay.
Doug Harris. He went to his elders to ask them, did we do this? And they were like, yes, we did. And they proceeded to show him like places on the reservation where all this stuff was that they just didn't show or share. And the elders took this evidently as an indication that it was time to start talking about this stuff again.
Good.
They stopped talking about it because every time they'd mention it, it would be called devil this or Satan that, and they'd try to get it destroyed. So a lot of the places on the landscape that you hear Devil's Den or Devil's Gulch or that was a sacred indigenous place that got relabeled.
Of course.
Oh, wow.
And so they stopped sharing their ceremonial spaces because they kept getting destroyed and labeled as, Satan's playground or whatever.
You can't blame them.
Wow.
You got to preserve your history and heritage at all cost at that point, you just, and then now, our friend Clifford Mahooty, the Zuni just started sharing their knowledge about Star People and their history. And it's just something that, the Book of the Hopi was written, but it took that guy 3 years to write that book, to decode all of the stories and the history and the ceremonies and put it in. It's essentially just this thick book that this guy he lived with the Hopi, and he was lucky to gain access. They were they were not willing to share any of that information.
All this Narragansett elder has said is, let the landscape speak for itself. That's all he'll tell you. They don't say much more than that to the rest of us.
Wow.
But that's the guiding words there, is let the landscape speak for itself. So
this is speaking to me.
that's kind of what I took from it. Like, as I started to look at stone rows in a whole different way, and I started to see designs, I started to see, I see how these things are actual serpent representations. They're petroforms. They're not just stone walls. And once you start to see things that way, you can't unsee them.
And if they're not serpents and they're stone walls, it's still amazing. It's still incredible. Okay. You know what I mean? Like, even if they turn out to not be serpent walls, which it connects in my heart that you're onto something, Mike, just from everybody that we've been having on and the people we've been talking to over the years. It resonates with me. That's some of the information that you're saying, for sure. But again, even if it's not a frog and a serpent and this head, and it's still an ancient wall, and that's good enough. That's amazing enough. And it's just absolutely incredible how advanced some of these places are, when it comes to the design.
If we could go and bring back, there's a picture right there.
This one?
The arched one?
Yeah.
That is the front of Raven Ridge. So that is what I think could be the serpent's mouth.
Oh.
That's what they call an Anticline. Now,
why does
in
that
modern
look like
times,
it's bending? Like the stone's
it is bent.
Bending.
That's where stones came together at a fault line. The
crazy.
Stones actually bent. So that is now called the oven by Western folks. But I think it could have been considered the mouth of the serpent at the end of the ridge, the southern end of Raven Ridge.
It looks like a serpent's mouth.
Really looks like this, guys. If I'm going to do my best to describe it, but we have this. What's encasing it? Is that all stone too? I mean, it looks smooth.
That is just stone.
And
that is all
have they
natural.
Smoothed it? Have they?
No. Although I wonder if Native Americans altered it in some form.
I don't know. That's just so strange.
I don't know.
I'm going to do my best to describe. Bub, maybe you can describe it better. I don't know.
I mean, it looks like a. It looks like if a tree grew on its side and had a big curve in it, right? Because I thought that was a tree laying over the top at first. But that's all stone as well. So it looks like, if it's coming from the left-hand side, it's nice and flat, and it makes this very nice parabolic curve over the top in one kind of layer of stone. And then below that, there's a lighter layer of stone that also is doing the same curve,
which looks bent.
But then that's where
like
that gap, right? And then that's where that gap is opening up, and then it looks like the lower jaw of the serpent is below that.
It's right underneath it. Okay, yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking too.
Because
in all
being
these
a fan
shapes,
of snakes and growing up with them, that looks like the serpent's mouth for sure. That's wild. And to back to
turtle
Mike's
shell.
point of
a turtle shell.
Well, that too, but the energy flow, right? That serpent coming out of the ground and trying to bring that energy out of the earth, and in that fault line, like, to me, that's just too spot on.
Oh, right.
We've learned enough about spot on
fault lines and sacred sites here in Ohio that just like makes my head spin.
Right. But weren't you saying earlier that the serpent energy is like from the earth, Mike? Am I wrong about that? That you said?
No, you're right. It does. It comes up from the underground. From
saying it's
the Kundalini,
looks like
man.
It's literally burrowing out of the ground.
Your sacred chakra is near your spinal cord, and the Kundalini energy rises up. That's the Medusa. That's the symbol of our pharmacy organization here in the United States. That's the representation of the serpents coming up from the bottom and working its way up.
It also has something to do with water, because a lot of these stone forms, like the stone rose, the serpent rose, and other stone forms like the cairns, a lot of times they find they're built over sources of water of high permeability, where the water is closer to the surface of the earth. So these seem to not only like be representational, but also maybe functional in that they mark actual areas where there's underwater or underground water permeability.
And there's something about water and rock, when it comes together, it does create kind of, dowsing rods, and people that are looking for water, they have this electromagnetic phenomenon where their stems cross, and it's always where that it's just a really, all of ancient sites, particularly all the ones I've been to, there's always some kind of a river or a stream or an underground cenote in Mexico or a spring. It's always there.
And this is along Lake Champlain. This would have been on the water back in the days of the Champlain Sea and Lake Vermont before it. So.
Yeah,
that's too crazy. That's so cool.
Man, if you just had somebody that could recreate that old map and put,
I'm sure they could,
and 3D model all these sites on the old Lake Champlain or the Champlain Sea, man, that would just be incredible. You could get a really good understanding of like, hey, this was on the shore, right here below's the water. You have all these sacred sites around it. And then it really starts to come together like, oh, there's something here.
The state does have a good resource as far as like, you can go to the Vermont Geological Information Center, I think it is. And that's an even closer look. It almost looks
that's
like
crazy,
Right.
Yeah.
So this is just a little closer look of, and again, that rock looks like it just straight up bent over into an elbow shape, and it looks like the mouth of a snake coming out of the earth.
It's wild.
Unreal.
Vermont has online resources where you can overlay maps of the Champlain Sea and Lake Vermont over modern day Vermont. And get an idea of where those shorelines were, which I've been using, because when I find stone stuff, I'm like, well, why is this here?
Yeah.
And then so I use that as one of my diagnostics. And that's where I started to find, the fins on the shore, so to speak. And then I started to find these large scale serpent forms, perhaps.
8,000 years ago, that thing went dry. And now, so that means these...
It didn't go dry completely though, because we still have a lake.
Yes,
so it just
still
receded.
have the lake. Right, but it was it larger in size, or it was roughly the same size? It was just
it was larger in size, much larger in size. Yeah.
Okay.
This reminds me of that story that we came across with the Paiute Indians,
Yes,
Death Valley, and the Havamasuvs, and
yes,
when there was water there and it connected to the ocean, the Pacific. This seafaring race, the Havamasuvs, were cruising around in their boats, but when that water receded and turned into Death Valley, they stayed up in the mountains. It's a wild story. It's a little bit off tangent from this, but just in that kind of similar vein of
the lake
where
disappeared.
Was the water line, where did things go to? It makes my brain start thinking about the fact that we're on our timeline, our scale, our zero level, right? Where were things at that could we be 1,000 feet up in this location and go, well, that used to be sea level to whoever was here? I mean, it's kind of blowing my mind to think that we might be looking in the wrong spots a lot of times now, naturally, because it's not where things were. We're at a different horizon line.
Yeah, and the Havamasuvs had
so wild.
Flying canoes, or the stories of the Paiute, and these ships that they would come out of, and they would go up and visit them from time to time. But they were up in the mountains, but they used to be on the level with the water line, and then they slowly started moving and receding back up into the mountains where they preserved their technology, inner Earth.
They built a city, They built a city back into the
Sierra Nevada
back
mountains.
into the pinnacles, up into the arches and the points of the mountains. And it's a story being recounted from a Paiute elder to a non-Paiute member that is in there, kind of this journalist at the times from these older kind of Western journals. But it was interesting too, kind of what you said earlier, was that knowledge and generational loss with the great die-off and that gap from the oral tradition being passed down. From this story, the Paiute elder was saying that it was more of even the younger generations just had lost that connection to where they don't care about these stories anymore. We can tell them stories like this all day long, and it doesn't matter to them because they don't have the same connection, which I think is interesting as well, because we, as the time we're living in, it's hard for me to wrap around the fact that
how is that just not interesting?
Too long ago, not just long ago, our entire country was not what it is currently now. That's not that long ago. That's a couple hundred years. That's not thousands and thousands of years ago. So I mean, it's tough to even wrap our heads around.
Well, if you think about it, if they were doing these kind of landscape size alterations, they were probably doing it to tell the stories. Because, if this, we were looking at a frog effigy, and a serpent effigy, and that I said, related to a story that was told by the Abenaki long ago, and once they were moved off of these lands and pushed westward by the settlers, they would have lost touch with the stories that were encapsulated on the landscape.
Sure.
They would have been cut off from their heritage that way too.
Right.
So we're looking, I have immense amounts of respect for the indigenous people today, because they have preserved culture despite many attempts at having it wiped out entirely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And being oral.
Well, it probably shows why they're hesitant to want to share with us. What they still have. But,
what?
I mean,
these elders, a lot of elders are getting the sense that now is the time for some reason to come out and talk about this stuff. Tom and Terry and the people they bring into Serpent Mound, all the different cultures, the Maori and the Dogon have been out there, and they're bringing all these indigenous cultures from all over the world, and they're speaking at these events, talking about their history and their culture for the first time. It's like, wow, and this stuff is just starting to come out. Really, in the last less than 10 years, we're starting to get a lot more information, and I respect it. Mike respects it. Bub, you respect it. Stoner and Disbrow and Master Control respect it. But a lot of people just still really don't care. It doesn't affect them if you can't make money off it. if it's going to impede something.
Jesus.
But because here's the thing, as soon as we discover these sites, now you can't build a shopping mall on top of it.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things get kept secret, or they don't come out. If an institution does discover it, it's like, well, let's just kind of not let anybody know about this so we can continue and move forward with whether it's a construction project. I don't know, but I'm just
a developer's worst nightmare, you know?
It really is. They can lose
I'm out here saying, hey, look,
dude,
we need to save this stuff.
You can lose $1 million a day on some of these sites. If you run into an archaeological site, you're losing millions of dollars. And, these guys got companies and stockholders. They're not going to let an 8,000-year-old stone chamber stop them from putting up whatever. And a lot of these are on private property. Thank God, Mike. You know what I mean?
Mike, I was just thinking you should have like a Mike Luoma, like a realtor sign, like an anti-realtor sign. Like when you go out and find these places, be like, don't build anything here, damn it. Like, instead of like this land is for sale. Like, no, it's not.
Realty.
There's something here we need to look at and preserve and understand.
Non-developer.
And not blow up to make a bridge or a highway byway. Like, let's not blow this up too.
Yeah.
Like, geez.
I like that idea.
And hey,
like,
there's developers that are doing good work. Our buddy Mike Cobb from ECI.
No, absolutely. But I thought it was hilarious. And the anti-version of like, you're not buying this land. Like, there's something here already. Like, appreciate what's here.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to turn everything into a parking lot. We don't have to pave everything. And we're going to lose. What we're going to do is we're going to end up not knowing what the hell's going on. We're going to look around. It's just going to be parking lots everywhere we go.
Hey, our city's already became that.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. You look at Columbus, Ohio, we've already lost all that. Now all we have is Mound Street to show us.
And you know what I'll tell those people, those folks that don't really care? Go sit in that stone chamber that Mike did. Go sit in there quiet for an hour. And
you're not experiencing it. That's why you don't appreciate it.
Jump in one of them chambers. I'll bet you if somebody could experience it like Mike did and have a little bit of an open mind, they might be changed. I just think people don't get out and see these places. I mean, that's. Well, I read about it. It didn't affect me until I started going to these places. Until you go there, then it becomes real. Then it becomes this thing that hits you in your mind, body, spirit. Like, oh my gosh, this is special. Not only is this special, but this has been hidden. This has been, we don't understand this. Why is this a mystery? Why don't we know this stuff? And it just becomes
I've been doing what I do,
Yeah.
Right.
I wrote the book,
absolutely.
Why I've got the Facebook group, why I do videos. I do videos that I call experiencing because that's what I want people to do is I want them to experience these places and realize that there's value to them and worth and maybe something sacred,
Yeah.
And let's think about what we're doing and maybe preserve them.
Yeah.
And be more aware of what's come before us.
Well, I'll tell you, Mike, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I didn't have the idea or thought of us coming out and shooting some stuff with you because we are a video production company as well. We have some great documentary film camera systems and some gear that, we've tested out in the field. And this kind of thing is something that we want to shoot more of. We've shot a lot of really amazing things for other people. We're starting to shoot our own content and not just the podcast, but we want to get out there in the field and help people like you and show the world some of these things that are just unbelievable mysteries to us. And one of our passions is getting that out there, talking about it like we're doing on the show, but boots on the ground, and it would be incredible to, go out and document some of these places. So
we have to have you come up here sometime.
Just thought I would put it out there. It would be an incredible honor. I've heard so many amazing things about Vermont. I've driven through a couple times, but the ancient history of Vermont.
It's great.
I know, Bub, you've done some skiing there.
Beautiful state.
Yeah.
And I came to Vermont to go to college and just never left. It's just that kind of a place.
Yeah.
It captures your soul, and I felt like I was in the place I was supposed to be. Although I love the place in Massachusetts where I grew up even more now that I'm doing this, because I've learned such the deeper history of that area that I didn't know in the past. So it's kind of wild, even how these two areas are connected, because I'd also discovered that people were kidnapped from the Marlborough and Hudson area where I grew up in Massachusetts and brought up through Vermont, through a river that's about less than a mile from my house here, and up Lake Champlain and up to the Montreal area. So there are actual indigenous connections and kidnap connections, if you will, between the place I grew up and the place I live now, which is pretty wild.
Dang, that's super
That's
cool.
so crazy.
And incredible.
The highways I drive along run along the rivers that they used to use as their highways.
Amazing how that all just
you're kind of always wrapped up in it. Yeah. It's always
well, he didn't realize it
so
until
cool.
he started uncovering it too. Like, you've been sitting on that. You know what I mean?
Right.
You've been kind of
very
sitting
common
on
thread
it,
flowing through them. Yeah. That's so cool.
Now,
and each of these things is like, it resonates when you learn it. It's like,
and then you get the sickness, is what I call it. That's what I get. I get the sickness of just being that bug of, holy crap, here we go. I need that next big thing that takes my attention and holds it, like the earthworks in Ohio. I know there's mysteries out there to be discovered, and through this show, I think we're going to continue to keep finding more and more mysteries. There's a lot to uncover here in Ohio. There's a lot in Vermont. There's a lot in Massachusetts, the Hudson River Valley. I mean, it just never ends. Yeah. We have another show that we do called Strange Happenings. And what we found out is that strange stuff never stops happening. It's always happening.
and there are strange connections too. Like with the stonework in Vermont, one of the first conferences that was done up here on all this stuff was in the 70s. And it was Professor Warren Cook at Castleton State College who put this big ancient Vermont conference together. The other thing that Warren Cook is best known for is Bigfoot studies.
Makes sense.
So when I was I went through his papers. I went to Castleton and did some research. As I'm reading about all the stonework stuff, I kept coming across all this Bigfoot stuff. It was like, not my gig, but it was kind of wild to see how there were connections between things.
There always is. I mean, we love Bigfoot. We love ancient civilizations. We love the UFO sagas that are going on right now, seeing strange things in the sky. It all really does. And we talk about this a lot, how it does interweave. I started out being obsessed with the paranormal and ghosts and Bigfoot and UFOs as a kid, and kind of got really burnt out on conspiracies and stuff like that in my 20s. And then the lost civilizations came into my life at the right time, where I needed a spiritual uplifting. And there's spirituality in that search of ancient civilizations when you start talking about these temples and these perfect geometric structures in the cosmos that they were tracking. And it was this very intense religion that was scientific. It was spiritual. They had a type of technology that was much further beyond our material understanding. And all of those passions, to me, the ancient civilizations has it all together. It all comes together.
Yeah. And I think that we're only beginning to understand the ancient civilizations that were out there. Like I was saying, I think there's one that was on the Champlain Sea that was a seagoing civilization that, could have inspired stories of Atlantis.
Yeah.
And then I look at the old Abenaki lore that talks about things similar to seven sages coming ashore. You hear them talk about their Thunderbirds, and they talk about a guy who went and found the Thunderbirds and found that they took off the Thunderbird wings and put them to the side. So he went and got into the Thunderbird wings and tried to take them up into the sky and ended up crashing. But then because he did that, they took him to the Thunderbird place up in the sky and turned him into a Thunderbird so he could fly with them.
Right.
What?
Right. Amazing.
I want to do that. Where's that at? That's awesome.
There's a lot of, no, I'm not going to say the same, but you hear these stories of, the sky people coming down to earth, taking a certain chosen member up into the sky with them. You have the stories from the Bible, Ezekiel, these stories we hear throughout history. I mean, they're even in petroglyphs, they're in ancient art. It's, are they visionary states? Are they real occurrences? Are they, some sort of...
That started to say that this civilization, the Abenaki, is as old as those other ancient civilizations because they have those same kind of stories.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But we weren't aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I didn't hear of this. When I'd read Graham Hancock writing about the Seven Sages, he doesn't mention the Abenaki.
Right. Right.
But there it is. It's right here in our own backyard.
Mm-hmm.
These people have those stories too.
Mm-hmm.
We need to consider them as an ancient civilization.
They have their own Viracocha, their own Enki and Enlil, their own Quetzalcoatl. It's all these stories, whether it's Horus, and it seems like these type of stories are in every culture. The ancient Indian epics have very similar, like these men came ashore and they were these, people that taught the folks how to read and how to plant crops. And it's just unbelievable. It just never ends. These things that line up. And this is another piece of the puzzle for us, Mike.
Makes you think it goes way, way back.
And I think it does. And I really do think it does. The more of these conversations I have, I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done, but it sure does seem like that. Now, Mike,
I feel like I've told you guys so little. Like there's so much that I could tell you about that.
Let's go in. What else can you tell us? I really like where this is going.
There's a mountain north of here on Lake Champlain called Eagle Mountain that looks like it's a stepped pyramid when you look at it on LiDAR. And I've found stones there that are turned to the side to make like the representation of either fins or gills, that they're done in threes and they replicate as you go down level by level on these steps of the mountain, so that they're like, 6 feet tall near the summit. You go down a level, they're like 12 feet tall. You go down another level, they're about 25 feet tall, and they're turned in the same manner all the way down the side of this mountain. So I'm not sure what was going on here, but again, this would have been an island in Lake Champlain or in the Champlain Sea way back when. So there's so much up here that just makes me scratch my head and wonder.
Wow.
All along Lake Champlain. There's Camel's Hump is a prominent mountain. That's what we call it now. On the horizon when you're at lake level, and pretty much all around you see this mountain. It is a shape that I seem to see replicated in stones that are standing up all around New England. Like I've even seen one in the Flag Swamp near that old stone wall that I mentioned, the 4,000-year-old one, that looks like Camel's Hump in Vermont. So that made me wonder too, if that was like a sacred mountain that they replicated in stone.
Right.
All the way down the coast.
Like like a miniature, like a model of it.
Right.
And when I found out that those circular ditch mounds had artificial horizons around them, I began to wonder, could that have been the horizon of Lake Champlain or some other ancestral homeland?
Right.
It didn't necessarily have to be the horizon there that they were replicating, because what they found is that it was the same artificial horizon around all the different mounds. So we'd have to do some work, but it'd be interesting to see if you could find what that horizon was.
Sure.
What it represented. And,
Unreal.
Was it the ancestral homeland of these people that were stargazers and built mounds?
Yeah. Yeah. And then they maybe came to Ohio, came to Kentucky, came to Indiana. Wow.
And,
West Virginia.
and in waves, in waves. There might have been an initial bunch that came down that are like the precursors to Adena, and then we know that the Hopewell has slightly different, more ornamental sort of approaches, and so that could have been another like wave that came down and brought like a reconnection to the earlier culture.
Wow. Is there anything else that you would want to share, Mike? Is there anything that just has been burning you up that you're on right now? What are you currently researching? Are you, when the book was done, have you kind of just put the stone mysteries on the shelf, or?
Oh no! I was gonna say. I just was in Massachusetts, found a couple of interesting sites in like central Mass that I don't want to say where they are because Massachusetts is so populated. But I found what I thought were like old stone rows that could be serpent rows, and shared them with some of these other researchers who were like, wow, that's just like something I found here. And so what I've been finding is that if I find out that Indians, Native Americans, indigenous people lived in a certain place, and I go there and it's got the right conditions where there's ledges breaking out of the ground and water, there seems to be this ceremonial stonework. It just seems to be in those places.
Yeah.
Like I found out there's this park in this one central Massachusetts town that is on an old pond, and it's surrounded by old farms, but the Nipmuc used to live there. Well, it turns out when you go to where the Nipmuc used to live, you find ceremonial stone landscapes, or at least these serpent rows and these things that I've shared with other researchers to get their confirmation on. And they say, yeah, that's something. So I think that there's a lot to this, and I'm just really tip of the iceberg at this point.
Yeah, I was going to say there's so much work to be done, and for it to be even accepted, I think there's a long road ahead for people to unfortunately start taking this stuff seriously. And I think the more and more people that you get interested in it, the more you talk about it, the more the word spreads. Getting the next generation interested in this stuff is something we're passionate about. It's always keeping the mystery alive for somebody to keep going. One day somebody will pick up the torch from you, Mike, and continue on the gentleman that wrote the Manitou's book and the book Manitou. So it's
I know there's some other books in the works though that are going to be coming out, like these other researchers that I'm networking with.
Yeah.
I think you're going to start seeing more about this.
Fantastic.
In a more accessible way, so.
Great.
I just saw a great presentation by this other guy, Dan Pizzoni, at the last Nera meeting. In New England, a lot of this stuff gets explained away as being, colonial or sheep farmers. What he's found is the same work, similar to the designs that we find in New England. He's found it all the way across the country. And that was his presentation, is like, here it is in Kentucky, here it is in, New Mexico, same type of stuff that we have up here. It's just not as well documented in New England, and it's not tied together. And what that does is it eliminates those myths of the colonials built it or the sheep people built it, because they weren't out at these other places, so they didn't build it here, and it's the same as it looks in New England. So there's I think we're on the verge of stuff happening, and as I was mentioning, I've got the Ancient Stone Mysteries of New England Facebook group. I feel like people have already taken the torch from me there. Because there's people posting stuff that I know a year ago they were like, what's the deal? What's going on? And now they're
full steam ahead.
Serpent effigy. Look, there's this massive turtle effigy.
The internet has taken over. I remember going on your Facebook group like, wow, this is really, really active. There's so many posts. There's so much information on there. guys, go check out Mike's Facebook group, because it is incredible. And you also have your Glow in the Dark Radio Facebook group and all those as well, that you guys should check out for sure.
I mean, we're going to talk about my science fiction and stuff.
Yes. I mean, if you want to, can you talk a little bit more about Nera? Because when we were, and then we'll kind of switch gears here, but real quickly, when we first met, you were going to this Nera conference. And I said, that's awesome, because when you come back, when we get something narrowed down, I'd love to hear more about some of the people that, and you've talked about some of the speakers, but who were kind of the top guys that were at this Nera conference. And tell us a little bit about that organization.
Well, Nera was started in the early 60s, like in 1964, by amateur archaeologists and antiquarians, and it's the New England Antiquarian Research Association. And early on, they were very much in the kind of mode of thinking that there were pre-Columbian European explorers here. And so that's the basis for a lot of the work into the 70s was looking at the chambers and the stonework as being of possible pre-European origin. But in the 70s, these guys, James Maver and Byron Dix and a few others, started to say, well, wait a minute, maybe not. Maybe there's an indigenous origin to some of this stuff. And they began that side of research. But what you find is that the organization is open to both of those views, although I think these days it's probably more people are focused on the indigenous origin of things. But basically, it's just a volunteer organization. People join. They're state coordinators, chapter coordinators. Speaking of Oak Island, Terry DeVoe is the Atlantic Maritimes coordinator. He's shown up. He's a researcher who's shown up on the Oak Island program, and he's one of the second vice presidents of Nera. So Terry was there. He was like the master of ceremonies for the conference. Cool. And Glenn Kreisberg, I don't know if you're familiar with Glenn and his work. He's out of the Catskills. He's got a book called Spirits in Stone, and he gave the keynote address on Saturday and talked about some of the stonework he's been finding throughout the Catskills and near Woodstock, New York. So, wow, it's a very cool organization. There's a lot of people that are just on their own initiative out there, checking out stonework and trying to figure out, how it all fits together in history.
Wow. I didn't realize there was this many people researching this stuff. This is incredible. Like I said, I haven't really been able to find a whole lot in terms of like books, but you just said, a lot of this stuff is like starting to come out now. But I'm just so thrilled that there's this many people researching and you have these conferences, in this organization, Nera. I want to learn more about it. And I think our listeners, you guys should definitely go check out Nera. And, is this a conference that just anybody can go to? Is this something
you have to be a member of Nera, but it's $20 a year. And if you, if you become a member and pay to register and go to the conference, you can go. So awesome. Nera.org is their site.
Nera.org, everybody. Check that
and
out.
And they do have stuff on there too from like these researchers I've mentioned. This guy Norm Muller is like a legendary researcher of the stonework. So you can read some of his research reports there on the Nera site.
Fantastic.
There's this guy Larry Harrop did a lot of stonework investigations, took a lot of photographs. He passed away and it looked like all of his stuff was going to go away because his internet went away, all of his internet presence was gone after he died.
Oh my
Nera
God.
picked that up and now is hosting it on their site. So
oh my God, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. I've always kind of wondered that some of these guys are getting up there in age. Like what happens when, we have a friend in Ohio that's an amazing researcher that's fallen ill here in the last few months. And, we've been worried about him and, I know Jeffrey and some of the folks in the community in Ohio will definitely preserve, but it's like, wow, he has so much information. Like when he passes, where does that go? Luckily he's written a lot of books, and but it's always amazing that Nera did that to,
I was really
preserve
psyched to see them do that. That was
amazing.
impressive to me.
Very
I was like,
impressive.
well done. And so I've gotten more involved with Nera in the last year or so, and
Great.
and it's the president of Nera, Harvey. Why am I spacing on his last name for some reason? It shouldn't be.
It's happened to me like 5 times already this episode. It's all good.
But he'd kill me. He read the book and he's like, excellent writing. And he's like, now I want to come up and see that stuff in Vermont that you were talking about, that large scale stuff. He's like, either it's real or it's pareidolia. So let's see. So.
Right.
That comes up on this show, pareidolia, all the time.
Yeah.
Never can tell.
Got to be aware of it, because we do that. Our minds do that.
Now, Mike, I know one thing that I kind of left out of your intro is you're a voice artist as well. And is that something you've been doing since your radio days?
Pretty much since 2006, when I started narrating my own books.
Oh, wow.
I was looking for a way to promote my science fiction book I had put out a year earlier, Vatican Assassin. And I was like in between radio jobs, and I was trying to figure out, what can I do? I can't advertise on the radio.
Right.
And I started podcasting the chapters of my novel. And in so doing, I read the characters as voices.
Cool.
And just kind of started doing this stuff without realizing I was doing it.
Yeah.
And after narrating my own books, which I've got about 8 now.
Wow.
I started narrating other people's books.
Okay.
So
for Audible and so forth, stuff like that.
Yeah, so you can find me narrating. For some reason, I've become a self-help narrator. Like, people who do self-help books like me to narrate self-help books. So I just did one on fix overthinking in relationships.
I mean, you do have a nice and calm voice. I like listening to you for sure. I mean, I've been digging into your episodes, and you do have a very pleasant voice. It's somebody that you can tune into and listen to for a long time. So I make the connection there.
Well, thanks.
And you said you have 8 books. What was the first book that you wrote? Was that The Vatican Assassin?
That's Vatican Assassin. And it was a case of, they say, write what you know. And I was like raised Catholic and knew a lot of Catholic history and knew that we used to have assassins that worked for the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
So my book took place in the not too distant future, about 100 years from now. And the lead character is an actual assassin for the Vatican.
Wow.
The new Catholic Church.
I could buy that.
Is involved in a Muslim Christian war. And so he's an assassin for the Vatican as this whole thing opens up. And he's sent to the moon to kill the governor because the governor is unstable. They think that she may be going to the other side, although she's been neutral. So that's how this whole thing starts. And
that's awesome, man. That's
kind
amazing.
of exploded from there,
Yeah.
That's really cool.
That's great.
What's the other kind of, I mean, are they all science fiction and kind of taking different pieces of just history or context and reforming them? Or, obviously with Vatican Assassin, do other books follow a similar kind of theme or kind of interpretation?
I kind of just used that as my jump off point. So I grew a whole future out of that Vatican Assassin.
Okay.
That became a trilogy. So it's Vatican Assassin, Vatican Ambassador, and Vatican Abdicator, because the lead character actually becomes Pope and then abdicates.
Okay. Nice.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a crazy situation. The lead character is not somebody who should be Pope. So like he gets into this situation where finally it happens, and he's like, "I'm the fucking Pope."
Yeah. Well, that I went on a deep dive of the history of the Pope, of all the popes. Me and Bub were raised Catholic, so I was fascinated that there's a YouTube channel called Charts. It basically lays out all these charts, and one of the charts is the history of the Pope. And then I watched a whole series on, back in the day, there's just some popes that just got thrown into there and did not want the job at all. So that's totally historically accurate. And then you had popes that were just power hungry, and then they would put their sons into powerful positions. And, there was a period there where there was a run of some pretty corrupt people that were in the papacy.
Oh, yeah.
And it's super, super fascinating history. But yeah, I definitely went on a little bit of a deep dive. So what's the most recent book you wrote other than the Ancient Stone Mysteries? That's your most recent book. And I know you write some comic books and stuff like that too. What was your last nonfiction book that you wrote?
Last nonfiction or fiction?
Or I'm sorry, last fiction book that you wrote.
That was, I've got a series now that features the son of the Vatican assassin. His name is Alibi Jones. So
it's an awesome
this was the fourth book, and Alibi's series is called, or the fourth novel, like the sixth book, because there were some short story collections, but it's the Starseeds of Earth.
Wow.
In my universe, there was like this ancient star-going race that, as they collapsed, sent off their DNA in starseeds, and that's how we actually got started here on Earth. It's the kind of panspermia idea put into play. So in this book, The Starseeds of Earth, I wanted to kind of combine some of the stuff I was getting into.
Yeah.
So it actually opens with Alibi Jones going into a stone chamber in Vermont.
Yes.
Yes. So that's how the Starseeds of Earth goes on.
Dude,
there you go.
I mean, that'd be something I'd be into it. I'd be into that.
Yeah. He finds the starseed. He finds a starseed is still on Earth, and it looks like an ancient obelisk.
Whoa.
So
that's crazy.
That's kind of where I'm going.
Awesome. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's similar like underlying themes because it's me.
Yeah.
So
yeah, sure. But I mean, people that enjoy your books, I mean, that's something that, they can connect with. And it's like, it's a Mike Luoma original, baby. That's what makes it you. That's what makes your art. and
it's kind of fun to narrate my own books because then people can hear how I'm thinking of it as I'm writing it,
Sure. Nobody better to interpret your own work than yourself, because you have those inner monologues. You're hearing that story as you're putting it out, and the angle of how certain things need to come across emotionally speaking, or the severity of it. Because I know that I like listening to audiobooks. I know Kyle does, and Mike as well. So it goes a long way when you can really capture that story a little bit better.
Exactly. It's I mean, and it's a lot of people have to hire a voice actor to, especially if it's nonfiction. But it's because, they can't read the characters or they can't, they're just writing a book. They're not necessarily able to, act out the entire book, even though they've written it. So it's an interesting kind of a combination that you have, Mike, with, and I'm sure your audiobooks are popular. I mean, could you tell us a little bit about, you have your website, mikeluoma.com, you have glowinthedarkradio.com. Tell us where we can buy these books and connect with you.
Well, as you say, actually glowinthedarkradio.com and mikeluoma.com go to the same website, and that has links to everything else.
Great.
So you can go to those. There's my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/mikeluoma, or facebook.com Ancient Stone Mysteries of New England under the groups. You can find me there. And I'm on Twitter as @MikeLuoma. I'm on Mastodon is @MikeLuoma. I'm not on TikTok, although Wait, no, I am on TikTok, although I don't do much on TikTok.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We got slowly into TikTok ourselves. We're on TikTok, but it took a while.
I haven't figured out how to do my stone stuff on TikTok yet.
So. Yeah.
When I do, I will.
Talk to the Wizard Stoner. He might have some pointers for you, because we kind of had that same kind of, we weren't sure how our content fit into TikTok, but, we have a growing page on TikTok and have a few followers. It got kind of thermonuclear there for a little bit, but we're posting again on there, and it's a fun one. But, this kind of stuff, people are really interested in ancient civilizations on TikTok. There is a big little niche, I guess you could say, on TikTok of people that are putting out some pretty cool content on ancient civilizations and all over the world. So it's definitely a growing, burgeoning part of TikTok for sure. You're not just seeing, it's interesting. It's like anything else. When Twitter came out, it was used for a specific thing. TikTok was like weird dance videos. Now it's becoming something a little different, where you can really easily, with the algorithm, kind of finds people for your stuff a lot quicker and easier than some of the other platforms we found. I
do a lot of like long form video. That's why I'm like if you look at my experiencing videos on the Ancient Stone Mysteries of New England YouTube channel, they're all, some of those are like 2 hours long, that I put together. So I'm not used to working in like little tiny TikTok channels.
Well, your TikTok could be like, hey, I'm walking into this chamber. Here's the outside. Here's me walking in. You're going to notice this. You're going to notice this. And in a minute and a half, you're walking out of the chamber. You just gave a minute and a half tour of whatever chamber it is. And then you make 100 of those with every chamber that you go to or something. But, I could see the long form stuff for me, I still really, really love, because that's where you get kind of the in-depth, you get the full picture. But the TikToks and some of those stuff, I think it really does help pull people in. It gives them a little snap into, and then maybe they'll go and dig into and get completely obsessed and watch a bunch of long form documentaries or read some books like yours. But who knows? Hopefully they're not just trapped in that minute and a half video world, and they're
not just dancing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you can also, you said you're on Twitter, Mike, find you on Facebook. And is there any last word that you would like our audience to hear? Is there anything that's just burning that you want to share?
Ooh, I've got something I made that is a special thing I can share.
Okay.
This is a, let's see if I can get it in the camera. This is an excerpt.
There you go.
So this is the chapter from the book on the stone chambers.
Okay.
And what I've done is I've turned it into a color excerpt, because I couldn't print the whole book in color. So this is like just these pages done in color.
Nice, Mike.
Oh, wow.
As an excerpt. So if you go to ancientstonemysteries.com/excerpt, the only people I'm telling about this are people who are watching this right now.
Awesome.
But if you go to ancientstonemysteries.com/excerpt, you can follow a link to this and get it for $10.
Oh, dude.
Oh, cool.
That's great. 100%.
Just if you're watching this podcast.
That's really cool.
Thank you so much, Mike. You guys heard that?
That's cool.
We'll put that in the description. That's one that I'll play back and pop in the description for when this episode premieres. I think that's the color photos. I mean, the photos in the book are great too. I mean, they're in black and white, but they're fantastic. I'm glad that
I couldn't do the color photos throughout 300-page book, because it would just be prohibitively expensive.
Right. Exactly. But like I said, that's
really cool though. I like that little condensed down little snippet though. I
haven't seen anybody do that before.
Yeah, that's really smart.
Just an idea I had. I was like,
dude, that's a great idea.
It's sharp.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of books like that. It'd be really, really interesting if the word gets out, Mike. You might have a bunch of people kind of ripping off your idea there, because it's brilliant. I know I would if I was.
That's fine.
Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's any last words besides this, though, I just want to say I want people to open their eyes.
Yeah.
Be aware of what's around them, and that there's history all around you, whether you know it's there or not.
Absolutely. That's 100%. And that's what we're here to hopefully, get that message out as well for you and for ourselves, and that, have an open mind, connect with Mike. If you're interested in this stuff, there's a lot of researchers apparently that I had no idea were out there. Just now, me and Bub and Stoner and Disbrow learned about. So, we really, really appreciate the heck out of you, Mike. Thank you so very much for coming on our little show. This has been an absolute blast. We're approaching 3 hours, believe it or not.
Really?
That went really, really really fast. We got caught in some kind of temporal bubble, where time just completely slipped away, which is always the best episodes for us when I look up and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been almost 3 hours. Where did the time go? This has been fantastic. Mike, we appreciate you so, so very much. I don't want you to leave. We're going to come back. We're going to outro the show, but we're going to come back and give you a proper goodbye. And I just want to thank you again. Your information, your books, you guys, you're crushing it. And thank you so very much, from the crew, from me. I know we'll be talking again, so we'll stay in contact, but thank you so much, Mike.
Well, thanks you guys for having me. It's been a pleasure. I can't believe it's almost 3 hours. It just flew by. And
wait till next time.
All right, Mike, you stay right there. We're going to outro the show and we will be right back. But guys, Bub, incredible. Mind completely blown. I've got 10 more things I need to look into. Cup's full once again. I can feel it reaching the brim. It's starting to spill over. So that's when I know in my being it's time to all right, Mike, you got to start wrapping it up, buddy, because we could probably go another how many hours? I don't know, maybe 1 or 2. But this has been fantastic. Bub coming in from North Carolina. Thank you again, Stoner. Disbrow there in Master Control. Check out the Master Control camera that's new this week. Brought to you by Stoner, no longer the loner. And Disbrow, give us a little wave, bud. You're hiding back there. Where you at, Matt? Is he in there?
Disbrow. Is Disbrow in there?
Oh, okay.
Disbrow. He left. Okay. He might have left or got a snack.
He might have a shoot tomorrow, but
that's a good point.
But you guys can find us at The Strange Road. We're on TikTok. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. Check out the Facebook group, The Strange Road Hitchhikers, growing all the time. And, don't forget all of the links and description for Mike's work. You guys can find his YouTube page, find all those things in the description. If you like this video, if you like this podcast, please share it. Get the word out about Mike and all the work he's doing about the ancient stone mysteries of New England. And, we'll keep bringing you guys great content, great interviews. And, there's... we have a couple things that are new in YouTube. We're launching the super stickers and super chat. So, that's something that we're activating and going to start talking about. And I think, you guys support the heck out of us. We appreciate you all so very much. Mikey signing out. Bub, any last words from you? Did we forget anything?
None.
Did I forget anything?
No, I think we covered it all. Okay. No, it was a great episode. My only thoughts is just one of these, I love the fact that you come across something, you go, hey, we're going to have this guest on. We're going to talk about stone chambers.
It's no brainer for me.
I go, fantastic.
Yeah.
I might bring somebody on and I go, hey, I've got this guy. We're going to talk about expatriation and living. And you go, great. It's so fun to have that back and forth of just, this is for anybody that doesn't know, this is what Mike and I do all of the time. This is what we've done for our whole lives. It's gone, have you heard about this? We've gone back and forth.
No
so now it's kind of playing out. Yeah, it's kind of playing out in this bigger, format now, which is really fun. But I think it's interesting to kind of impart on people listening or watching, like, this would be like if you knew us before we ever did this too. We would do this to you at our jobs. We would do this to you at get-togethers, at functions. Hey, I just heard this, story or article. So I think it's neat that people are kind of just getting this interaction that, again, we just always have. And we're kind of like, you know what? I think people want to hear this.
Yeah,
And it's been so much fun.
And
it's been so much fun.
And if you guys like this, you like this episode, you like what you're hearing, you like what you're seeing, share it. Somebody else might be interested in stone chambers. You got a crazy uncle or a weird cousin, chances are they're going to enjoy something like this like we do.
Yeah.
So again, signing out. This has been amazing. Thank you so much to all you hitchhikers out there. Peace.
Take care.
We're out. Signing out. Bye-bye.